All right, let's sit down and get started. Dana, let's sit down. Let's get started. Okay. Don't have so many folks in person. Hopefully we'll make a quorum. Let's see what we got. We're going to have to check and see if we have a quorum first.
See, we can. So. John Agatha? Okay.
Does that get there?
Andy Castillo.
Okay, we made it just barely. Hopefully some others will join. All right, before we're going to call the roll, and we'll let Ann do that so that we are official. And then I have a couple of things to say before we have the invocation. Go ahead, Ann.
Okay. Reed. John Agatha.
Here from my squishy lair.
Anacua Garcia. Councilman Villagran. Peter Onofre. Andy Castillo.
Here.
Al Rodriguez. Michael Kinnick. Anne Marie. Jack Hebden. Wayne Eddington. Tony Edwards.
I'm here.
Michael Sanchez. Didi Balmaris. Kurt Anastasia. Christopher Fulton. Dr. Femi. Dana McGinnis. Jim Berg. And Anita Ledbetter.
Okay, we knew in advance that Anita's not going to be here. Her mother died. She's at a funeral, and Dr. Cantu is in New York at a meeting. But we did just get Femi, so now our IQ just came up. So all right. Oh, now we got Al. Just have a seat there, Al. We'll let you sit anywhere. But all right, we are solid for a quorum now. Okay, today we got just a couple of things to do, and so to try to put it in context, the first thing we're going to do is we'll have Kathy Garcia and her team talk about ERCOT, and in the interim between the sessions, what's brewing in Austin, where we are or are not going to some type of capacity market. Okay, because it makes a big difference. When we're doing planning, we can't plan in isolation. We got to plan inside the system we're in. So that'll be the first thing we'll do. The next thing is we're going to talk about generation planning, obviously, and there's really a couple of things that we're going to do. First of all, we're going to go through the fact that CPS is hiring a contractor, who they're hiring, what they're doing, and then we're going to have some discussions about the RAC recommending, selecting, whatever you want to say, but we can't hire. We don't have hiring authority, but then we will talk about us having someone that can help us. And as I've talked to many of you, the reason for that is because we've got, in this process, we've got to develop some trust, which we haven't done in all cases. And to do that, it's very hard when the organization that you're trying to understand, the situation you're trying to understand, you don't get all the information because it's declared confidential. Therefore, we're going to have some way to have someone that we have recommended and has been hired that we trust to verify, confirm, and check that information. Hopefully this will give us a little better feeling about what's going through here. that's really the crux of the day's meeting. Maybe we'll get through sooner. If not, we'll have a lot of good discussion. At this time, I don't know who's going to give the invocation. It says to be determined.
Jose Reyes,
Okay.
he's right there.
Jose, come on in, 2BD. Sorry. Good to see you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Let us bow our heads. We thank you for the many blessings you've freely given to each of us. We ask for your presence to guide this meeting of the CPS Energy RAC. Provide them with the knowledge, compassion, and wise counsel needed as they discuss the business matters on the agenda today. Help us all to remember that we are stewards acting on behalf of our customers, and provide us with the grace to serve all people well. And we ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Public input. Who do we have today, Ann? No public input. So Kathy, I'm turning it over to you and your team.
Tell you what. So, good afternoon. I'm Kathy Garcia, and for those of you I haven't yet had a chance to meet, I'm Vice President of Governmental Relations, Regulatory Affairs, and Public Policy here at CPS Energy. And the business units that are under my purview will focus on policy development, advocacy, and fostering relationships with our local, state, and federal policymakers. The Energy Market Policy Unit is one of those units that's under my umbrella, and that unit is led by David Key. So David will be our speaker today. David and I have been asked to visit with you on the policy discussions that are underway at the PUC and ERCOT. Our intention today is to provide some general background on these entities, specifically how policy is created within those arenas and how we, the staff here at CPS Energy, are able to engage in that process. We're going to move swiftly through those beginning slides so that we could spend time on the actual concepts and proposals that are being considered at those two entities. Today, what we're going to do is look to capture your questions as we move through those concepts and those policy proposals. We're going to look to capture questions. And after this meeting, in one form or another, we can make sure to provide you answers that we hope would be helpful to your deliberations. There's some key points that we both wanted to make sure we leave with you today. And the first one is that things remain very uncertain. Policymakers have made changes during the last legislative session, such as with Senate Bill 3. And over the last year and a half, a number of the agencies have held rulemakings, putting laws into rules that industry would follow. And they continue to press forward with those changes to some extent without allowing very much time to see what reactions or what outcomes have come from those initial changes that they've made. The governing structure of both of these entities have changed significantly as well. They've removed industry knowledge from those governing boards. State leadership, such as the governor, has much more influence than he has had or that office has had in prior years. So you're going to hear David talk a little bit more about that, but the importance of that is it impacts our ability and really all of the electric utility industry's ability to have its perspectives heard and incorporated into policies. And then when we seek to influence energy market policy, it's not just our view of the world, but our view relative to our functions in the market and that of all the other stakeholders that participate in the energy market. So for those reasons of uncertainty and change, we have to be thoughtful about our future and the decisions that we make, looking for ways to mitigate these risks and uncertainty. And we really appreciate the work that this committee is doing to help us navigate that path. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David and let him get through the slides that he's prepared today. David.
Thanks, Kathy. Good afternoon, everybody. This presentation is entitled Energy Market Transformation. It's really going to discuss, like Kathy mentioned, all the changes that we're experiencing. Particularly in energy markets, there's a seemingly big transformation that's going to happen or in the middle of happening. So I'll be talking through that in a little bit. We'll go on to the next slide. Here's the agenda. We'll see. Oh, okay. Perfect. Yep, I got that. All right, perfect. So I'll be the clicker. So here's our agenda. I'm going to briefly, quickly talk about regulatory structure, focus on the PUC, the Public Utility Commission, as well as ERCOT. Go through some quick facts so everybody has kind of a good groundwork of where everything lies, and focus on policy priorities of these commissions and these agencies. Talk about market redesign blueprint. That's something that Reed had mentioned is, this thing about a capacity market or what kind of market are we going to get. This is all part of this market redesign. And then some strategic considerations that our leadership is having to take under consideration as part of all this work. And then we'll also have time for a question and answer at the end. This is a quick overview of how policy is made. It starts at the state legislature for the really big policy decisions. Starts at that level and works its way down to the PUC and to ERCOT. So very high level law is made at the state legislature. They create a law that turns into a rule at the PUC, and then we implement that in ERCOT. At the state, lawmakers are the ones that make those decisions. We provide them information, let them know how these laws are going to affect us, and then they make decisions based on that. At the PUC, there's a little bit more involvement. It's more of a stakeholder process. There's a lot more participation from us. So we can provide written comments, and we can try and help commissioners understand the implications of their policies. And down at ERCOT level, it's more highly technical, and you talk about more engineering and finance there. So you have a lot more stakeholder process and impacts from us. And you'll see in later slides, I'm going to talk about how we can influence based on votes at different subcommittees at ERCOT. But at the legislature and the PUC, everybody that makes decisions is either a legislator or is appointed by a politician or a political process, whereas at ERCOT, there's more of a stakeholder process. And each of these steps also provides feedback to each other. So as we make policy decisions and we implement them, we can also provide feedback saying, this kind of worked, this kind of didn't work, and we can also give recommendations back up the chain for additional policy changes in the future. I wanted to focus on some governance changes that we got out of the last legislative session. At the PUC, we used to have 3 commissioners. Now it's going to be 5. So that changes how you get a quorum. It used to be no 2 commissioners could meet, and now you can have 2 can talk. Still not supposed to talk about business unless they're in an open meeting, but there is that potential now. Notice they're still appointed by the governor, so there's still a lot of political influence at the PUC. And whereas before you had to be very well informed, each of the commissioners need to know what they're doing. Here, 2 must be well informed in utility regulation. So that really means that the other 3 can be experts in other fields and apply their knowledge base here, but 2 must be informed on utility regulation. It's also important to note that the PUC are the decision makers at this level. At the ERCOT, there's been a lot more changes. We're seeing a lot more stakeholder dilution, if you will. So the board used to be made up of 16 members, and each of them were represented by, or we had membership from each of the different stakeholder bases. You have people representing loads and consumers, power marketers, power generators, municipal utilities like us. They were self-selected. Now we have a 11-member board that's executive. It looks more like a corporate board, so more executives from across industry, and they're not allowed to be stakeholders. So you can't be participating in the ERCOT market and be on the board. And this is a big difference because we used to have the ability to say, we're going to have to abide by these rules as a utility or as a power market or any stakeholder. So let's have a say in what we're doing. And now we're seeing a board that is completely separate from that process, and they don't have that benefit of that expertise. So as Kathy mentioned, we are losing some of that knowledge base. We're having to actually find ways to integrate into these board members to help them understand the impacts. And just recently, this past Tuesday at ERCOT, we had a stakeholder meeting to try and figure out the right way to interface with the board members, because They're very much separated now from the stakeholders. So trying to figure out that process and work through that. Here's just a quick overview of how deep and how broad the stakeholder process is at ERCOT. You'll see the orange highlighted boxes there are all different places that we engage, where you have the possibility to engage. The Technical Advisor Committee and all the subcommittees are voting bodies, and CPS Energy has a seat at each of these voting bodies. And then all the working groups and task forces there at the bottom. They're not voting places or places we go and basically do work. Engineers get together and figure out problems for the benefit of the grid. And we have multiple different folks engaged across those levels. You see on the top there's committees of the ERCOT board. Those are your standard committees. They did create a newly formed committee called the Reliability and Markets Committee, which is going to be focused on really the operation of ERCOT. So even ERCOT itself is trying to separate how ERCOT runs the company versus how ERCOT runs the grid. They're trying to make those separations there. Here's some quick facts about the regulatory process. So I'll just highlight a few of these. Basically, ERCOT is the last step that we saw earlier in policy making. It starts at the legislature, works its way down to ERCOT. Everybody's aligned on reliability first policies. We've seen a lot of discussion in session and in open meetings at the commission on we need to figure out ways to make the grid more reliable. So that's their focus. And I'll show you in a minute some points, some policy points that they've been focused on. And also just wanted to run home the fact that we are key participants in the ERCOT process. And some quick facts about CPS and ERCOT. We're actually required to be part of ERCOT as a transmission operator. It's an obligation that we have. Because we're interconnected with the rest of the grid, we are required to participate in ERCOT. We've actually been a member of ERCOT since the beginning. ERCOT was formed, even before it was ERCOT, it was called a Texas Interconnected System. It was formed during World War II as part of the war effort. If you could get enough electricity down to the factories to make parts and pieces for the war effort, then that was the focus of that. So that's how they started the grid in the early days. And then once we started getting more organized in the 70s, they created ERCOT. And we've been a member of ERCOT all along the way. So the main point here is that connecting to grids is not a local decision. Since we are part of a bigger piece here, that's going to be something you have to take up with the legislature if that's something that is a desire. Here's a description of some policy initiatives. You can see I have underlined at the top each of the different priorities. Those are related to markets. That doesn't mean that the ones at the bottom aren't important. Actually, those are the ones that we've already covered. We've covered all these reliability policies. We made lots of changes to make sure that the grid is more reliable. We've stepped up weatherization requirements. Now generators and substations have to be weatherized to certain standards. And we're even redoing that standard again this year to make it more exacting and more stringent. But now we're moving on to market pricing and market design. And the reason that we're doing that is because the policy is really focused on, or the policymakers are being focused on dispatchable generators. And we think about a dispatchable generator. That's a generator that we can turn on when we want, and we can move to meet the load. So if there's a high demand, we can ramp up the generator and it meets that. And so that's the preference of the regulators at this time. The discussion at PUC is based on what we've heard of the crisis-based business model, which is how they've described ERCOT in the past. As we get closer to an emergency, the prices go up, and that creates this incentive for generation. That's a model that we've been using for a while, but PUC and ERCOT have decided, and the legislatures have largely helped them decide that that's not a good business model. They want to move to this conservative operations where they will basically bring on generators earlier and keep them on longer to make sure there's lots of extra room, there's lots of extra contingency. That's having impacts in the market. And so commissioners are trying to set policy, and they came up with this market redesign blueprint, basically said, well, now that we're changing how we operate, we need to change how the prices work. So they come up with these three options, which they're going to be evaluating. Now, I'm underlying evaluating because they're not making decisions to make these changes yet, and they're not implementing them yet. So they're going to take a while because these are some pretty big changes. We're not talking about implementation in months. We're talking about probably years. Probably takes a year to get through the rulemaking process, come up with all these rules, another couple of years to implement them. So these are long-term decisions that the commission's making. And so I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail. And I think this is where, if anybody's interested, we can have a little bit of a conversation. First is a load side obligation. I'm going to refer to LSEs just because that's the vernacular, but it's a load serving entity. So anybody who has a customer that they're serving power to is considered an LSE or a load serving entity. And under this option, the commission is trying to figure out, well, if we can create an obligation where if you have a customer, then you need to have some capacity committed one way or the other. You can't just wait for the market and buy things in real time. You have to have a contract. You have to have a power plant. You have to have something online to meet the obligation. That's one of the ideas that the commission's having. That works fine, except for when you start thinking about, well, how do we count wind? How do we count solar? How do we count all the different types of generators? And they're coming up with the notion that not everything's going to be accredited equally. Everything's going to have a different accreditation. So if the wind performs pretty good, then you'll get a certain percentage. And we've even heard ideas that maybe generators that have a tendency to trip offline, maybe they're not reliable enough. Maybe they'll have a lower accreditation. So there's some equity there a little bit across the different technologies, but this is still a very high level concept right now. But that's going to be a key sticking point in most of these is how do we accredit generation? That's going to be something that is important because we're changing how we're changing how we value these generators, and it's not set yet. So as we look at how we value generation, when the teams go out to make a deal, it's going to impact how much it's worth when they go for a contract. Now, the goal with this option is to spur demand. And so basically, if you can create an obligation on the load to get some demand, or I'm sorry, to get some generation, you're going to create this demand that's going to create people wanting to build power plants. So that's the whole concept behind this one. I'll move on to the dispatchable energy credit. And so I think most everybody's probably familiar with a renewable energy credit. You have to have a portfolio standard to have all these renewables in your portfolio. This would be similar to that program, but it would be for dispatchable generators. So there would be a requirement to have a certain level of reliable or dispatchable generation in your portfolio. And so this is something that can stand on its own as a portfolio standard across the industry, be seen as more of a generator side obligation, or you can include it in a load side obligation where you have to have a certain amount of dispatchable generators if you serve a load. Again, this is still high level. We haven't made any decisions, and they're starting now the evaluation process. So we'll see where they go with that. But I think the point here with this one is to build new generation. Part of the concern that Commission has is a lot of generators are retiring or are becoming less cost effective compared to the lower renewable costs. And so there's a concern on the Commission and legislature and everybody else that as those renewables come online, they're going to push out dispatchable generators, and pretty soon you're not going to have anything left. That's the worry. So they're trying to create an incentive there to create more dispatchable generators. So I think you started to sense a theme here where everybody wants more dispatchable generation. And then the last big topic that they're talking about is what's called the reliability backstop. And this is more focused on an event like we saw with Winter Storm Uri. But they basically want to take a set of generators and pull them out of the market and basically rate base them and have them, have a rate base cost to pay for that generator. So it's not going to be a market-based generator. Regulated rate of returns to make that. And what's going to happen when you take out generation from the grid artificially and have it waiting there for emergencies, you're going to create artificial scarcity. So it's going to look like you have less generators online, which will increase prices. That sends a price signal to investors to invest. That's a roundabout way of creating new generation without having to do any of these other, requirements. Downside, it does increase prices. The upside is it would probably create, generation ready to provide backup power in the case of big emergencies. So strategic considerations. So these are lots of different things, and I guess I've turned the fire hose on you guys, but so this is really all the things that are happening. There's a wide variety of changes, and everything is changing on how we value generation. So it's a very relevant topic for this committee and this body to think through, is because as we make decisions here, these are the kinds of things we need to think about. If we create a reliability obligation on a load, and you have to buy these things, how's that going to affect our plan? We should be able to meet it, but it depends on how we accredit or how the state accredits things. What are the costs to market participants, cost to our customers? Lots of different things to think about. And those are just the direct impacts. You can also have, secondary impacts as generator developers come up with new projects, those are going to be used up pretty quickly and contracted pretty quickly. You can see, raises in prices on bilateral markets and things like that. So lots of things to think about, as well as environmental considerations. There's also probably impacts of, recent newer environmental requirements and rules that are going to impact all of this. So this is just to say that there's a lot to think about. I think the takeaway box here is diversification of the portfolio. I think that carries across from what we heard from Kevin and his team, is that that strategy is probably the best way to meet all these challenges and be safe for, basically be ready for whatever comes through. I think that was my last slide, so I'll say thanks and see if anybody has any questions.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, we purposely left a lot of time here for folks to ask questions about this. It's obviously an evolving process, and unfortunately, some questions just aren't answerable yet, but at least we'll get started. So let's start over here with Michael and just go around the room so that we've got and then next time we'll start over here with Femi. So.
Hi, good presentation. Thank you. So the accreditation concepts, are those spelled out anywhere? Is there a web page we can go to check it out and see at least what they're thinking at this point as far as looking for the different ways they're going to do it between non-renewables and renewables?
Nothing has been published yet. I can say that the PUC does have a consultant that they've brought on to basically do all that work and come up with ideas. So that's in process, and that will be posted. We can share that with you once it's public.
I think that question relates to slide 11. So let's see if we can get slide 11 up there. Is that right, Michael? Okay, let's get that up there so we can talk about it. Is this similar to the NRG Exelon proposal, where they factor the
Right.
different? Okay.
Right.
There is a very long paper that's been written that I think y'all probably have. If you don't, I do. We can get it out to you that does that. But what it basically does, correct me if I'm wrong, is it puts reliability factors on each type of system. For example, if you've got a natural gas fired unit and you actually have storage of natural gas right by the unit, it has a higher factor than if you have to buy it. So there's all kind. It's a very gradated process. Okay. Anything else, Michael? Dana?
Are you familiar with the evaluations that they're talking about?
At a high level, I think they're basically going to use, going into the industry terms, is load carrying capabilities. So there's a calculation that, the engineers will use to basically figure out how much can you rely on a certain resource for over a period of time. It has to do with capacity factors and things like that. It's kind of wonky, I guess, but that's all we have right now is that proposal so far. Like Reese said, it depends on lots of different factors. If it's a coastal wind, it might have a better load following pattern than a west wind. And if you're solar, you might have better load following than all the wind. And then if you're natural gas, you might have better. And if you have on-site storage, it gets better. So it really depends on all the factors that go into that. But that's basically how it's supposed to be structured.
So are there standards for this?
There's factors. Do we have that report, or I have it? I can send it out, send it to Ann and give it out. It was done by a consulting group, and then NRG picked it up. Essalon joined them. There's probably others. I don't know how many others you got floating around, but
Right.
But that's the one that's the only load side one I've read any detail on. But do you have that, Ann, or I'll send it out. Okay.
So is it fair to say that basically you never know at any given time what those factors are?
Well, no, they're set. So if you're trying to determine whether you've got the obligated load side, if you're trying to figure out if you're fulfilling your obligation, it actually is different. The factor is different. If you have X number of megawatts of, let's say, solar in the summer, it gets a higher factor than it does in the winter. Okay, so it's got different factors. and they're debatable, obviously, and they're arguable, but at least they've got something you can, then there's an example in the appendix, so you can follow it.
And I think that's a key point. They're going to be debatable, and they're going to be debated at the commission. Different sides of people, everybody's going to want their resource to have a higher accreditation. So that's going to be part of the challenges. We don't have an industry standard in it. It's going to be something that's decided by the regulators.
And then ultimately, might have to actually get into the legislation. I don't know.
That's
if I
right.
go that far. You think?
Possibly.
It could, hopefully not, but who knows? What else, Dana? Dee Dee? Michael?
Yeah, just a real minor question here. When you're talking about SB 2154 and SB 2, the governance over PUC and ERCOT, what year did those take place? Is that fairly recent, like this year? Was it 5 years ago?
Those came out right after the winter storm. So if you remember, we had basically the legislative session at the same time as Winter Storm Uri. So those are recent. Those were in the last year or two.
Okay. And then we're also talking a lot here about supply side, making sure we have enough energy. And of course, we all want to keep the lights on.
Right.
But is the state or the PUC also looking at the load side and different ways of shedding industrial load or different types of load in a quote an emergency situation?
So I would say yes and no. They're relying on the existing infrastructure, the existing policies and procedures for load side. There's only so much they can do. They are changing their program. So the PUC does facilitate a program very similar to our DR program, but it's a statewide DR program. They have a different acronym. It's called ERS. It's Emergency Response Service. And basically, industrials can sign up for that, and then they'll use that to basically shed load for emergencies. They're making some changes to that. They're going to expand that program, but they really are focused on the demand, the supply side, less on the demand side. But they are making some changes on the demand side.
Thank you.
Anything else, Michael? Wayne? Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Reed.
Peter? Yeah.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Kathy and David, for the presentation. So it's very timely and valuable information for where we are. I wanted to base my question on an assumption. I know you don't have the details, but just an assumption on what you presented in the direction of this redesign blueprint and the current status of the generation that CPS has. So can you explain at whatever level how CPS could participate and potentially benefit from participating in the dispatchable energy credit program and the reliability backup process? And in addition, if you could go back to the comment about creating artificial scarcity on the supply side, just to better understand how that factors into the cost.
Right. So that should be on slide 13. Well, 12 and 13. Let's start with 12, talking about the dispatchable energy credits. So from what we heard, the commissioners are thinking that this would be not for existing dispatchable, but for new dispatchable. So this would line up with our strategy on if we plan to build or if we plan to contract with building with third party.
I'm sorry, David, can you speak up a little?
Sure, sorry.
I'm having a hard time hearing you from here. I don't know if it's me or it's the mic, but
Okay.
appreciate it.
So I think our strategy will align well with this. The requirement's probably going to be for new build, for new dispatchable generation build. So as we make those decisions, that's going to be something we need to consider is, are we going to be third party contracting for generation, or are we going to be building it ourselves? And it'll depend on how the commission implements this, but that could be one of the things that we have. As long as you have some way of getting credit for a new build, that would be the way to think through this one, whether it's a third party or whether we do that.
David, I think Peter's question is more to the point of who issues the credits, who pays for the credits, and how do you earn the credits? I
Right.
think that's more of the point. I think that's what Peter's getting at.
Yes.
Okay, that's a good point. Not sure yet. They haven't really talked about how they want to implement the design. They're just trying to figure out what the basics and the fundamentals. My guess is going to be very similar to the renewable energy credit. It'll go into some type of requirement portfolio standard, and my guess is the commission will probably have ERCOT clear it. So ERCOT will be the central clearing party. They'll be the one doing all the accounting for all energy accounting for all of it, checking to see if you're meeting your requirement for your load. That being said, they could really do a number of different things, but that's most likely what's going to happen if they decide to do that. It would be a cost to, it would probably be a cost to the loads is my guess. Not
Can you
sure-
repeat that last comment? I didn't quite hear you.
It be a cost to the load, so that's sorry, to customers, because that's typically how they've done other costs is they allocate all the costs of everything to consumers and to the loads, and so that's how they probably would do that. Still, that's up for debate.
So is that factoring into the question I asked about the creating artificial scarcity, or is that totally separate?
Right, so that's the next slide. I can go to that, move on to that one.
Okay, so just to finish up on that last slide on the dispatchable.
Dispatchable?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll go on. Let's go on to that. Answer that question, and I'll follow it up with the next. Just to
Okay.
get.
So I'm on this is a reliability backstop. This is taking generators out of the market so that they can be put off to the side and ready to run for emergencies. And so the design today is if you want to be a generator and you're not in CPS's position, so just pretend like you're Peter's generator company, you own a power plant and you don't have any other obligations, you just need to make money because you need to pay for your power plant. You basically get all of your money from the energy market. So you offer it to day ahead or real-time market, say, I'm going to sell you power, here's my price, and you'll get an award for whatever you get. That's how you make all your money for everything, and you have to pay for your operations, your guys paying the walls, your turbine upgrades, for everything. So that's how we work everything currently. This would take generators out and say, well, you can't participate in the market, so how are you going to make money? We're going to rate base you, and we're going to say you're going to charge your costs to all the customers across ERCOT. So we're going to take you out, you're going to be put off to the side, you're going to have a regulated rate of return, you're going to make sure you're ready to run. Now, once you've done that, now you're ready, you're just going to sit there and wait for an emergency. You've taken generation out of the market. And so you create this scarcity of generation because now you have one less power plant to pay for. And so the idea, or it's kind of the academic idea behind this, is that as we take that power plant out, well, now prices are going to go up. We'll have someone say, hey, I can make some money in the power plant industry and the power markets. I'm going to build a generator and make some power that way. So this is kind of a way to create an artificial scarcity to incent a power plant to be built. And it also creates a backup reserve that is, doesn't have any excuse that they're not ready. We've given them all the money that they need to be ready. They've met all the requirements that are required by statute and by PUC rules to be weatherized and to have gas contracts and have everything firmed up and ready. So it's kind of one of the things. There's been a lot of controversy on this, so just to take it a little bit deeper, there's been a lot of controversy on this because during the session there was particular companies that wanted to provide this on their own without any competition. So that's been a red flag that's been thrown up, and so people are advocating for more of an RFP process for this type of a service. And so that's one of the talking points, one of the deliberation points on this.
So that's what I was just going to ask about the Lee units. So the Lee units that are only used for peaking, just as a consideration, if those are taken off and entered into a program like this, is that feasible? Do you foresee that being something that could be done, and would it be something that could be analyzed by CPS as a benefit?
Certainly an option. I see Benny making his way up here, so I'll defer to him.
Thank you, David. So when I read this, I understand we're just talking about new units, and so the Lee units would not be included in that. If we built some new peaking units, then certainly they could be. But we need to hold on to these for what we're doing today. At the end of the day, we've got to have enough generation to protect our customers from high prices. And as long as we've got generation available, we're good. Is this an opportunity for us to perhaps build new generation? Yeah, I think it probably is. And I think it's something we're all going to need to talk about. But our Lee units wouldn't be included in this initially.
Thank you, Benny, for clarifying that.
Well, I'm not there yet. So let's just say that Benny and I go over here and we buy us an old frame 6 and we stick it out there in the country. Okay, we spend our money. Who pays us for that? And how do we get paid? I don't understand that.
Again, it's going to be very likely the commission will tell ERCOT, go make this program work. ERCOT says, okay.
Yeah.
So they do the RFP and then they, however much it costs, they allocate that to the load and customers pay for it through their bills like that. So,
Well, wait a minute. The customers pay for it. We're not running yet. We're just sitting there. We haven't sold any power.
right.
We bought the machine. We don't have return. We got an
Right.
investment. I don't understand the cash flow. So let's just say we do something like this, all right?
I see where you're going.
Hypothetically, we do
Right.
it. Minnie and I are sitting there, we put our money in it, but we don't have anything coming in, all right? Now, you say the customers are going to pay for it. Who are my customers? I don't have any customers.
So
The only customer I could potentially have would be ERCOT. Is
Correct.
ERCOT going to pay me for it?
you're absolutely right. ERCOT will pay for it and the ERCOT will go to all of their customers, which is everybody that's interconnected in
So-
the state.
They pay me on a upfront basis or monthly, or that's not worked out?
It's not worked out.
Okay, so maybe we're sitting there, we're out in the weeds, we got this machine, we hooked up to the gas line. We're waiting to flip the switch, right?
Right.
We wait. Every month we're waiting, we're getting paid by ERCOT, right?
Right.
Which then they're passing that on to other people,
Correct.
right? Okay,
Sounds a lot like capacity payment.
yeah, it sounds, yeah. Okay, does that make
Right.
sense? Does that bring up any questions? Did I miss it?
If I could read, if I could just finish up my
Yeah,
comment.
yeah,
on-
yeah, I
and
thought you did. I'm
and
sorry.
Go to your question, I can
I
pass it
still
back
didn't
off.
understand.
Just
Okay,
to
go ahead.
finish, and I can hand the mic off, so I could be
Yep,
done.
go ahead.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So just a comment, just obviously the type of generation, a diverse generation portfolio is important. And obviously the type of generation we prioritize to invest in with the portfolio is even more important. So based on this movement of the market redesign, I believe that maintaining and investing in natural gas generation versus solar and wind in the near term is more advantageous to the CPS bottom line and in turn CPS customer bill impact. So I just wanted to take a synopsis of what could be coming, and if we're moving as we are now, that's what I would think we would be looking to do. Thank you.
Got it? Is that it, Peter?
Yes, thank you.
Anne Marie? Christopher?
Thank you for the very informative presentation. A few questions. In terms of the upcoming timeline, and clearly this is going to be an iterative process. There's a lot of learning when there are this many changes going on. And I think you suggested probably years, which makes sense. But from what you've been hearing and observing, do you have any sense on what the short to medium term timeline might be for decisions either from the PUC or ERCOT, and what any particularly important milestones might be, especially before the session?
So I think probably getting organized and trying to figure out, which one do you want to do and how do you want to do it's probably going to be the focus, and that's where they're going to put all their energy. I did mention that they did hire a consultant to come in and basically turn the concepts into options and plans. And so I think that's where going to be their focus for the next 6 to 8 months to a year, possibly. And that will go through the normal process of the consultant will go off in the back room, come up with the papers, send it out, and then everybody's going to take a look at it and offer their feedback into it. So that's probably going to be the process. And then going into session, you never know with session, but I would say that it's probably going to be, here's the change. I mean, the commission's made a lot of changes. Let's just be upfront about that. They've made a lot of changes. So they're going to be talking about those changes, saying we've been successful, but we've been at 105% capacity, from them getting work done that, they just need more time to keep going. So my guess is they're going to say, we made a lot of changes. We've improved the system. We're going to keep moving and trust us. And then hopefully the legislature will let them go another 2 years to complete doing things, keep on the agenda. But we could also hear, directional instructions from legislature also.
And excuse me, your charts, particularly on 5 and 6, help illustrate those different changes and the structural modifications that have been made. And when I look at the ERCOT one, for instance, on 6, we see the new structure for the committees and subcommittees and working groups. I don't really see anything highlighted here in terms of how the public participation might factor into that, and when the general public can learn about this and hear feedback. Have you heard anything from either ERCOT or PUC on how they intend to engage with the public?
Right. So think typically PUC does have their, public comment session, just like we do here for our meeting. Anybody can offer comments into any project that they'd like to, so they're keeping that open. Same with ERCOT at their board meetings. General public is always able to go to any of the meetings. They're all open. They're online, broadcast via WebEx, and it takes a little bit of navigation, but you can get to the website and they have all the information there to participate. You can, go down a rabbit trail as technical as you want to. So there is that. So yeah, they've always had that, and they remain to continue to do that.
And one final question on the reliability backstop process. I'm trying to game this out in my head, and clearly, as you mentioned, this is all still pretty high level. But I can see, for instance, two models moving forward where existing generating units might be set aside versus the construction of new ones to function on that. And I'm wondering what the pros and cons have been so far. For instance, with the existing units of not really mothballing, but setting aside some of those units, particularly maybe older and less efficient ones that are still functioning fine. They just don't necessarily do as well as a newer unit. And whether ERCOT and PUC are thinking of using that as a way of making their own transitions for new generation for the next 20 to 30 years, and how the funding would work for that. For instance, would the CPS, for instance, would we be locked into a 10-year contract or a 20-year contract? And if market conditions change, is there a way for pulling out of that and renegotiating?
Yeah, I think it's probably too early to tell on the contract issue. My guess is it would probably be less than 10, 5-ish, maybe less. Based on the most recent new product, which was a different type of contract, they did a 1-year contract to get it started, to get the service started. And they're looking at maybe a 2-year contract if they want to build out a new service to kind of help spread those costs out a little bit. But so hard to say there. Remind me of the first part of the question, I'm sorry.
Have the conversations focused on to what degree there might be any preference, at least at the state level, on older versus newer units?
So I think the argument and a lot of the debate is going to be over cost and reliability. If we take out the older stuff and have it for emergencies, is it going to work? Also, if you take out the older stuff and have it for emergencies, it's going to cost a lot more to keep it going because the older units would probably need more investment to keep them up to date. And then if there's changes to any kind of regulations, environmental regulations, the older units typically have more investment needed to keep up with them because they weren't designed to meet those requirements. So that's probably the biggest part of the debate. I think you'll probably see people wanting to have the newer it's kind of counterintuitive, but you want the newer generators held off to the side because they're more reliable and they're cheaper. But you want that in the market because that'll bring your prices lower. So it's kind of a counterintuitive thing, but those are the two sides of that coin. And I don't know that we've gotten anywhere yet. It's still very early in the game on that one.
General Christopher. Okay, Femi, go ahead.
Okay, I have one of the benefits of coming late is all the questions have been asked. So I'm going to take you to slide 17. It's in your backup because all the good questions have been asked. So,
okay.
And while we're doing that, I would like to just, for the record, mention that some of us should pay attention to what the PUC is doing under project 52373. That's the project under which a lot of these are being discussed. And if you really want to knock yourself out, please read through all those stakeholder comments. There's a lot there. I haven't gone through it, but I hope I picked some of the juicy parts. So on slide 17, I bring this up because when I sort of started looking at these issues back in 2012, 2013, I was new to the terminology. So I figured I'll just get into the market and see what people are talking about. And they brought up this thing called the operating reserve demand curve, which is kind of what you're looking at now. It's essentially a demand curve for those of us who took Economics 101. It is a demand curve in the sense that you can see as you go lower, as you said, as we approach emergency, we essentially see higher prices. This was really what was, at least I'm recalling some of the meetings I attended back then, amongst professional associations, talking about why we don't want to be a capacity market, but we're using this mechanism to encourage building new plants and giving that price incentive for folks to actually build plants. And of course, we saw what happened in February 2021. And I believe that 10,000 number came down because folks were concerned that it's too high, because some people were actually taking advantage of what the market was trying to achieve back then. Anyway, so I guess I'm beginning to ask myself the question that, given that curve and this new market reform and all that, what has changed between 2013 and now? And I'll give you my thoughts and you can tell me I'm wrong. It was voluntary before. Now I think PUC and ERCOT is moving towards a mandatory system whereby you have to provide these reserves or else you pay, i.e. the generators pay, hence we pay the customers. So please tell me if I'm wrong or add some perspective. Thanks.
Yeah, those are good insights. I'll come back to this curve in a minute. I think to your point, previously the intention or the policy at the PUC and at ERCOT was let the market work. I think there was a firm belief that an energy-only market does what it's supposed to do. Because of things like this, there's concerns that capacity markets might be too costly to people. You'd get payments for when you don't really need the energy. Using a curve like this, where I'll just talk to it a little bit. If you look at reserves, that's how much extra generation you have online. So you don't really need energy. You're further away from urgency as you're further to the right on this graph. So the further to the right you are, the safer you are. The further to the left you are, the closer you are to rolling blackouts and load shed because you've run out of extra generation. And so if it's to the right, you have a price adder that's very low. I don't need extra generation, so I'll keep my prices low. As you get closer to emergency, prices go up until you've reached a point where I'm ready to turn off my load because this is costing me way too much. And so this was seen as the method to kind of balance supply and demand because if you go back to economics, everybody that's a consumer is an inelastic demand. They use and they use because they don't have a good price signal in the market. And so this was a way to figure that, to account for that. So that used to be the thing. Let the market work. Let this thing work so that generators will turn on when they're needed and stay off when they're not needed. They'll make some money when we get closer to emergencies, and then when they're making money, then more people are going to want to come in. That'll push us back to the other side. So they're just trying to have this balance. I think now we've realized, or the legislature and the commission, everybody's been unwilling to let the market work anymore. We're going to make it. We're just going to force everything to be safe at all costs. And so that's been kind of the challenge here is, you've probably heard of our generators being, forced online, being told, you need to run even though you're not in the money because we need extra reserves. And so there's a lot of that happening. So it's a big divergence from the old ways of let the market work to now we're going to be, reliability based. And that's why I said, this is a crisis-based business model is what they've called it. They've even turned the market into a crisis-based business model to where we used to want that because it provided the right incentives. And now it's something that is just totally unacceptable to anybody because before we thought we'd never get to firm load shed. And then, once we did, we don't want to go back there anymore. So that's been the tension there.
Timmy, is that it?
Just one quick one, please.
Okay, sure.
It's a quick question. Thanks for
Y'all got to
clarifying.
tell me when you're finished.
Yeah, no
I can't tell. Just say, whoa.
Slide 10. This is a very short question. I may have missed it when you said it, but those markets, the markets redesign blueprints, those 3 bullets, are they 3 options or are they 3 components of the same program?
So it's a mix. So there are 3 options and they can be taken individually. We've seen a mix of the first 2. You recall the load side obligation is your load, you have to have a generator. Some people think that maybe If you're a load, maybe you have to have a generator, but it has to have some decks. And so there's kind of a mixing of them. But these are the options that have been talked about and proposed. And one that I didn't include up here because it was very late in the game and we haven't heard a lot of discussion on it is a proposal for a more traditional capacity market. That really hasn't had a lot of discussion yet. They're focusing on these for now.
So in essence, what may come out eventually could be kind of a hybrid of.
Right.
Okay, thanks. I'm done.
Thank you. Al, please.
Okay, I'm going to get more pedestrian in my question, not so technical. On slide 3 for state legislature, they're setting the bills of laws. Are these aspirational goals? Because it seems like they're setting bills, laws, and then it's going through the process. Isn't that kind of backwards? Shouldn't they go through the process and then come up with something?
Usually that's how it works. And I did mention we give a lot of feedback, right? So in steady state, kind of normal run of the business, a lot of the policies already said we're making incremental changes and feeding that back. We need a bigger policy change. The winter storm really created, a big need for a policy change in the legislature's eyes. And so for lots of things that we're doing now going forward, policy is set by the legislature and at the Capitol. So they're redesigning kind of how we do things.
Al, one of the examples I can give is on weatherization, power plant weatherization. So the legislature passed Senate Bill 3, and in Senate Bill 3, there's a whole bunch of things that they said, you all state agencies are going to go promulgate rules. We want to see this change, but how you make that change, you can have a rulemaking, and you can bring industry to the table, and you can talk about it, industry, customers, and you can create the rule by which you're going to weatherize your power plants, but Senate Bill 3 says you have to do this. So the legislature does set an aspiration. They say, we're going to charge this agency to do this, and you're going to do it in this manner. And then that agency has generally a specified amount of time in order to put that rule together. And the other idea behind that is sometimes it's easier to tweak rules than it is to go back to the legislature and try to pass something. So they don't necessarily want to put too many prescriptive things in statute. They want to put them in the rules because they think they can come back and adjust the rules a little more readily.
Thank you. On slide 5, again, sticking with my pedestrian questions. If you have fully independent and unaffiliated board, do you go to Oklahoma or Louisiana to get the board members?
No, that's one of the requirements of the board. Everybody has to be from Texas.
So how and where do you find the board members? Or clarify, do they just not have to be in the industry?
No, they can't be affiliated. So CPS can't send a board member that works for us. We can send someone from the community, or they could be selected. We don't get to send anybody. We're not part of that anymore. There's a selection committee that is basically uses a search firm to look for qualified board members. So think of how a corporate board would be set up. You're not part of your company, but you represent the company on the board.
Okay. Okay. And the other thing that struck me when you said the legislature just said, trust us?
No, so I'm sorry, I may have misspoke. When the PUC, so I'll use the PUC as the example, they have what's called an agency report, which basically is a report card of everything they've done this year. So we've made this change because you told us to in this law. Here's all the stuff that happened. So hopefully, I think the PUC is going to go to the session and say, here's our report. Here's all the great work we've done. Here's what we're going to continue to do. Let us keep doing it, trust us. So the PUC would be telling the state legislature to let them continue on the path that they've been set on by Senate Bill 3 and the other bills that we've had.
Thank you. Chairman Reed, I yield my time.
Thank you, man. Okay, we just got a few folks online. Give me back to the other thing. I'm just going down here on John Agather. John, do you have any questions? Okay. Anaqua Garcia? Oh, maybe they're not hearing me.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. Andy Castillo?
No questions right now. Thank you.
Okay, and Tony?
No questions.
Okay, that was quick. Oh, okay, we got a new one. Jack, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. Sorry, I got on late.
Okay, all right, no problem. All right, thanks. Okay, we'll go back around and see if that brought up any more questions. Dana, go ahead.
Can we go back to FEMI's prices-based model graph? So what you were saying is that here was a market-based model, and it worked, and then it stopped working. Why did it stop working?
So that's mostly an optics question.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Why did it stop working?
For the PUC, for the people that are in charge of this being the model, they believe that it doesn't work. They believe that they believe we shouldn't be operating to the left of this curve. We should always have extra reserves. And so that was the previous way before. We would let, when I say ERCOT would let reserves fluctuate so that the prices could create the incentive, and that would have a correcting factor.
So it's my understanding that since this model was created 20, 25 years ago, the introduction of subsidies for wind and solar was not a market-based thing. And so this changed a market-based model. Am I incorrect in that?
Well, let me try something from the economic side. For any demand curve, there has to be a supply curve, okay? So there's got to be two curves. And the problem we had, as we found out when we studied the winter storm, is we could raise the price and maybe dampen demand, but it didn't increase the supply. And so consequently, since the supply was not increased, as the theory is, because the supply curve didn't work, right? It got up there and fell because we couldn't get gas. We had solar panels that had snow on them. We had wind that didn't blow. So we had a lot of failures. We had nuclear plants that went down. We had coal plants that went down. So even though the price was up, the supply curve wasn't there. You got to have two curves. You can't just have a demand curve. You got to have a supply curve. And the supply curve was a lot less solid and was not under the control of the PUC. It's under a lot of controls. That's what I think we found from our work. Maybe other people have another reason to think it didn't work, and we'll certainly listen to that. Femi, you have some, or did you finish? Dana, I didn't want to interrupt you if you didn't. Is that it? Did you have anything else? Femi, did you have some, or?
I think to your point about, no supply, therefore the demand curve is useless. I guess what keeps coming to my mind is that those failures I guess, when I look at the way this reform is evolving, and again, I cannot say where it's gonna land, but I feel that if for any reason there is that emergency, we're on the left-hand side of this, sort of towards the left of this curve, and there's no supply to meet it, what happens to the reliability question? Because what I'm reading is that the load 7 entities will be required to meet those. They're supposed to provide the reserves and have all the capacity, or else they pay. And my concern is that if we say LSE pay, in the case of CPS, it comes back to a customer pay up. And I'm concerned about that as a ratepayer.
Yeah, that is a concern. I don't know that I have a good answer for that, because I'm just, I guess, reflecting on your comments.
Yeah, that's kind of a statement. Well, okay. Still, anybody online that wants to say something, please speak up. Did we have any more comments here? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Got a late, raise that hand. I don't see your well.
I'm shy.
No, you're not. Come on.
You mentioned in your talk about renewable energy. Is this only for wind and solar and this type of technology, or will gas and nuclear be included?
Sorry, for which part?
Well, you were talking earlier, you mentioned a couple of times on renewable energy. So
Okay.
is renewable energy defined as wind and solar,
Oh, okay.
or
Right.
will nuclear and gas be included?
So I may have crossed my terminology. So intermittents, I think, are the concern. So anything that is not dispatchable. That's kind of the cut line at the commission in ERCOT. If you can flip a switch and move your generator around, then you're dispatchable, and if not, you're considered intermittent. I
So
think-
wind and solar would be considered intermittent.
Correct.
Thank you.
Femi?
Actually, Reed, I'm going to take it back to you because you sort of described a scenario during the first round of questions. And I thought you were going to come back to it. So I'm not sure if you're trying to describe that scenario about you and perhaps Benny owning the plants and waiting.
No, I was just trying to
Was
figure
that-
out who was going to pay.
Yeah, I was,
If we had
I
a
was hoping
plan
you
out there.
I was hoping you'd come back to it because
Yeah.
that's a question. I'm thinking about it also in terms of this energy only and capacity market.
Yeah.
You have capacity, you're not using it. You want some kind of compensation, which is what a capacity market is.
Right.
But at some point, somewhere in the higher up political, sphere, there's been a decision that Texas will not be a capacity market. And I don't know if that's the kind of, whether that's what you are leaning to
Well,
or not.
What I'm taking away here, I mean, this is just me. I'm taking away that all three of these, and then the fourth one, which is really straight on capacity and paying for it, it's all moving back more to having some type of capacity market. And that capacity market is going to be created by dispatchable power. And I've yet to find anybody tell me anything that's dispatchable other than natural gas. That's the direction I think we're kind of headed. I don't know. You guys are the expert, but so tell me where I'm wrong.
That's where it's heading is dispatchable. If you can figure out a way to combine, a firming product to renewable,
Yeah.
then it would help more.
I've asked many times to tell me one more thing besides natural gas that's firming, and I haven't gotten an answer yet, but I keep asking, and I'm still willing to listen. Okay, any other questions? Anything online? Great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Oh, yeah, you can do whatever you want.
Okay. I was just going to mention, because of the conversation here today, the Texas House State Affairs Committee is going to hold a hearing. It will be streamed live. They're going to actually do 2 back-to-back hearings next Wednesday and Thursday. And they have asked the ERCOT, PUC, the Independent Market Monitor to come in and talk about the current status. What are they seeing after certain changes have been made, and what do they see going forward? So you're going to see the House State Affairs have 2 meetings next week. And then the following week, you're going to see the Senate Business and Commerce Committee hold a meeting. So I just mentioned that to you in case you're interested in catching that. They archive them. You can go back and watch the video after the fact as well. But it might be of interest to you, particularly in the questions that you've raised here today. Thanks, everybody.
Sure, and that typically is archived somewhere, and so all you have to do, and I know we don't have people here that can sit and watch that, so when it gets archived, just send us out the link and we'll watch it, okay? And there's some really good people on there. I only know one, I think, Senator Johnson. All right, anything else on this? Somebody, I wonder where my agenda went. There it is. All right, let me see where we are on time. Sorry. We're okay. Let's take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back in for the generation planning part. Any questions or any argument? Okay, thanks. Bye. Okay, we're ready to start. It's 4:30. We've got 2 presentations next. First, Benny's going to go through this process that we're looking at to get a contractor to help them and someone to help us. And then John will talk about the modeling assumptions and start the scenarios. And Kevin will finish up right after that. So let's go ahead and start, Benny.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to change the deal a little bit because we're going to go around for questions right after Benny real quick, and because it's really different than the second piece. So we'll go around twice for questions. We've got a little bit more time. So we'll break for questions right after Benny's presentation. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Reed. Good afternoon, folks. Wanted to talk a little bit about contractor support we're going to get in place to work through the gen planning process, get you some help. All right, so we always work through this, and I apologize. Okay, so anyway, we're going to discuss contractors, and I'm going to do my best to stand right here. We need to use two-generation contractors if we're going to achieve our mission of getting information to you all for an assessment and getting a recommendation to the board here late November, early December. There's an extended startup process on a modeling contractor. The good news is we have CRA on contract. They've been helping us for many years with our generation planning. They use the Aurora model. They're highly respected in the industry. And when we use the Aurora model, we have a straight plug-in to our financial model, and we can take it all the way to bill impact. So the net is CRA is here, contracts in place, they're ready to go, they can start now. In fact, they have started in discussions with John and team. But what we also have to do is establish an independent RAC advisor. And so what we believe it makes the most sense is to work through a process with you all and let you pick a company. An independent company will get requests for information to staff this role. We'll work through a process. Now, I'm going to walk through this line item by line item because I want you to see this and looking for your input, okay? We'll capture notes if we want to adjust this, but I think it's really important. As noted, the second contractor will be an advisor for the RAC. You'll get to select them, whoever that is. We'll contract with them. We'll get a non-disclosure agreement in place and we can release all information to them. They'll see everything that CRA sees. Their duties will include review all the generation planning inputs, assumptions, processes, and results. Everything we've done, everything CRA will do. They'll attend the RAC meetings, and they'll provide a report to the RAC. We'll go into a little bit more detail now, but this is our vision. Okay, so the RAC advisor, the scope will include, and this is where we're looking for your input, okay? And you have copies of this, and if we need to change it, we can certainly do that because we need to get this request for information out shortly. Review major CPS Energy and CPS Energy consultant input assumptions associated with key electric market drivers, such as load growth forecasts, commodity price forecasts, environmental policy expectations, and ERCOT market outcomes for reasonableness. Assess CPS Energy's scenario concepts and alternative approaches to risk analysis. Could include extreme events and stochastic analysis and how that compares with industry. Finally, benchmark input assumptions and uncertainty ranges against public databases, industry norms, and those used by utilities across the country. As I told you, CRA works for a number of utilities, and I'm confident the company we wind up picking will be in the same, when I say we, I mean you, will be in the same vein. They'll have that overall experience here in the U.S. They will evaluate the various portfolio constructs that we expect to develop for reasonableness. They'll review major portfolio modeling outputs to confirm the relative performance of the various portfolios against major CPS Energy objectives and metrics. They'll provide technical advisory support to the RAC during meetings and offer comments to CPS Energy throughout the process. And then they'll provide a report to the RAC related to everything we've asked them to do. So that's what we're thinking the scope is. But again, we would really like to get your input on this, tweak it, tune it, add stuff. I don't know that you really want to take anything out, but perhaps you do. We're open because we want this company to be your advisor. And we think they'll help us too. They'll help us be better. Now, this request for qualifications, request for information I mentioned, request for qualifications is a proper term. When we have these companies come in that respond to this request for qualifications, this is what we're going to ask them to do. And if you want to add something to this, we'll do it. We're going to ask each of them to summarize their experience, similar services they've performed, provide an organizational chart, lay out their workload, talk about the qualifications of each team member, key personnel, what experience they have, what licenses they hold, certifications, any ongoing commitments they have, any conflicts of interest, for example. Functions, similar projects, relevant experience, alternatives. We want them to do that for you, where you can ask them questions. If you want to take a look at the request for qualifications, this is the link, and you have that in your deck. Now, we've identified some companies up front based on input we've gotten from a variety of sources, including some of you. Here's the list we have today. Please, if you have anybody else you'd like to see on this list, tell us, and we'll put them there. We just need to know by the 22nd of June. Sooner if you can, please. But if there's somebody else you want to add, we want them on the list because we will send them the request for qualification. We can get them to the table, hopefully. And this is the timeline that we're working to. June 16, we're here. By June 22nd, we're looking for additional contractors that we can put on the list. By the 23rd of June, we want to release the RFQ to the market. We want to send it to all those people on the list. We're giving them 2 weeks to respond. Request for qualification, that should be very doable. July 15, we'll send packets to you. July 21st, we have a RAC meeting. Would be our recommendation you pick the top 3. If you pick the top 4, okay, that's fine. If you pick the top 2, it's your call. Typically, when we do them, we pick the top 3. But whatever you all are comfortable with, we want to support you. Then on the August 18th meeting, we'll bring those companies in and they'll work through that discussion we talked about. You ask them whatever you want, get them to show you whatever you want, so you're prepared to make a decision. We'll seek board approval for the purchase order because it'll exceed the limit we have. We'll need board approval just as part of our process. We'll get the contract awarded by August 30th. And they will be yours and they will go to work for you. That's the extent of this presentation. Love to talk about it. Would really appreciate any input you have.
Okay, we'll start over here this time, and we'll just go around the room, and then we'll catch the people online if there's any questions for Benny. And just so that you understand, we're taking 3 meetings to do this and taking our time because I've heard from a lot of people that we get rushed into things, so we're not trying to rush anybody. And also, you need to understand the way it's set up. When we get the packets back, they'll be sent to us. You'll review those, and then of course next month is where we'll go through and y'all will pick the top 3. All right. There won't be anybody come in to interview until you've picked the top 3. That's a straight vote. the ones that get the most votes do it. Now, in the August meeting, if it's 2 or 3 or whatever, they'll come in, they'll actually talk to us, and at that time, we'll pick one. I've used a system, again, this it's kind of complicated, but I've used a system that does it. It's called rank order or rank choice voting. So you'll rank the top one at 3, the middle one at 2, and the lower one at 1. And then you actually redistribute the one that gets the lowest to the other 2. If you still don't have a winner, you then, obviously, you can usually do it in one step with 3 companies. So that's really where we're headed. Sorry about that. I just wanted to give you a little clarification. If you have another way you want to pick it, I don't care. But some way we've got to be actively involved in this process. We'll start with Al over here.
So Charles River Associates has already been chosen
For the company.
for the company?
Yes, sir. We already have them. We use them for generation planning and other market analysis. We've used them for quite a few years.
Okay, I have no questions.
Femi?
I'm going to ask a very simple question, and then hopefully come back in the second round if I need to. Whatever happened to Brattle, and I mean, I'm just stepping back and saying, whoa, what's going on here? What happened to Brattle, and why are we having a new set of consultants or contractors for this?
I can answer that one. I had a lot of people that complained about Rattle. They thought they didn't get to pick them. And I don't know if Rattle's on the list or not, but if they're not, we can put them on there and they can send their qualifications in too.
So
Right.
Brattle is also working on our cost of service study for us right now. So they still are around, but they don't do necessarily the generation planning.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to ask for any new names, but I'm just curious to know how we got to where we are now. Because in between our last meeting and this meeting, I don't know if anybody was briefed about what's going on. So apart from one discussion I had with Reed, this is all new to me.
Yeah, and if y'all don't want to do this, we don't have to. I mean, that's fine. It's just, I've heard from a lot of people, we don't have someone that we can talk to. We don't have somebody that we selected, and we don't have somebody that we can trust. So this is one solution. That's it. It's not the only solution. It's just one. Okay, Christopher.
2 questions. To what degree is this process set up for the RAC advisor similar or parallel to the one that resulted in y'all hiring CRA? And if so, what are the comparables there in terms of what you're expecting from them and what we might be expecting?
So many years ago, we used this type of process to contract for technical support activities, and we would have used this to obtain CRA. And I don't know how many years they've been here. Excuse me, longer than I've been here. Apologies. CRA has been here longer than I've been here, but we have a structured process that we use to procure professional services, and they would have come to us under that.
Great. And in terms of our timetable, once they hit the ground running, I'm guessing that it'll take them a month or 2 to start with their research from September onward. How do we anticipate some of those milestone reports coming from them, considering we're looking at some pretty urgent decision points for the RAC committee moving forward?
So you're talking about the RAC advisor contractor?
Correct.
Yeah, it will take them just a little bit of time to hit the ground running, but because this is what they will likely do as well, I think they'll be pretty quick, and it's going to really be up to you all how you want them reporting to you. We can do it monthly, we can do it weekly. It's whatever you want. Whatever meets your needs is what we'll get them to do.
And as a quick follow-up, any sense from the get-go at this point how long the contract would be for?
Well, we plan to run through this process, but I don't know, we probably do a year anyway.
Thank you.
Normally, that's what we do. Yeah, it's a year.
Thanks.
Just to follow up on kind of one of your questions, one of the things that's come up and how this group would be used is real simple. People have wanted to know what this last solar contract costs. It's obviously considered something that CPS doesn't want to disclose. So we would be asking them a question, is this in the range of the market as been represented by CPS before? They can say yes or no. That's how we find out things. Anne Marie?
Thank you. This is, I think, will be very helpful. It will help us be able to focus and move forward, especially considering the timeline and that we're under. So I look forward to this process and learning more about
Peter?
the individuals.
Oh, I'm sorry, Anne Marie. Peter?
It's okay.
Yeah, also, I wanted to say thank you. I'm grateful for the subject matter experts that you continue to provide, and concerning the Brattle question, I know Brattle's working on the rate design, and also they've been very helpful from my perspective, very helpful in understanding where we are from rate design to where we are today, and I've gained a lot from that. And so I look forward to this process, but I really appreciate, Benny, how you're giving us the opportunity to really have the input. And I know that's going that extra mile, and I appreciate that from the leadership all the way down. Every interaction that I've had has been positive like that. So I just want to give you all credit when credit's due.
Thank you. Wayne? Michael?
No, I think this is a great idea. Thank you. I'm sure within these companies, we'll find somebody who can help advise us. But just thinking outside the box a little bit, I'm also wondering, are there any more nonprofit or academic type organizations that might be considered American Public Power Association or a university type of think tank organization? Are there any other organizations that we might want to consider?
You know what, we're open to that. I don't know that they'll do modeling the same way where they'd be in the same position to do a peer review. But again, if you'd like to put them on the list, we'll absolutely reach out to them and see what we can find out.
Thank you.
Back to, I guess it's Christopher's point, we've got to make sure we've got somebody that doesn't have to pull a group together, go get the back data. They've already got it in their database so that they're actually using a lot of the data they've already pulled together. For example, what they think their price curve looks like on natural gas, what they think it might look like on solar panels or something like that. So yeah, you could use some nonprofits, but my guess is like universities, they'd have to go pull a team together, and I don't think we could do it in the time frame. But if you've got an idea, we'll send it to them. Okay? Dee Dee.
On the list of potential respondents, I think it would have been helpful to have at least like a web link for these various companies so that we can do some homework on them. I mean, I'm familiar with 5 of them. The others I'm not, so maybe we might get links to do our homework.
Sure, and you'll also be getting their reply to the RFQ.
Right.
So yeah, we'll get those to you. That shouldn't be real hard.
And then I have a question on Charles River Associates and on the scope of the advisor. I'm just wondering, like, at where and at what time will they take like our input on for the modeling?
We're going to talk about that at the end of the next presentation.
Okay.
And we want your input. So
Okay.
next presentation.
I've given my input several times, like in writing and in this meeting. So I'm just wondering at what point do we actually just start running this stuff? Like some of the suggestions.
We will capture that today. I know that. Let's capture today.
Okay. Thank you.
Dana?
I've never seen any of your input. Did you send it to all the RAC? I must have missed it. No comments.
Michael?
Thanks, Benny. Thanks for the informative presentation. Just got one question. Does the Citizens Advisory Committee have a similar contractor working with it to answer these kind of requests for information?
I do not believe they do.
Okay, let's go online now. John Agather? Okay. Anakwa Garcia? Andy Castillo?
One question, since I am on the CAC board, would it be possible to have a meeting where CAC is involved with this meeting to get, or just at least so that both committees are on the same page?
That's 10 more. Now we're at 31. That gets to be a level of crowd control. I'm not sure. I think we need to get management to work with them the way they've been working, but we'll take that under advisement, Andy.
Yeah, Reed, this is Rudy. If you don't mind, I think the CAC's charge is a lot broader, and actually, is going to be looking at, kind of the constitution of the CAC and their charge versus that of the Rate Advisory Committee. I think this work is more in line with the specific charge of the Rate Advisory Committee. So I don't think there are two processes for how both committees will be engaged is going to mirror each other. But we're going to have to kind of work through that, and we'll get with each chairs to talk through it, and then get y'all some more information. So just a little bit of patience, and we'll figure it out.
One comment along those lines. There's nothing.
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead, Michael.
There's nothing preventing them from attending these meetings, so they just wouldn't be able to participate. Like you said, having twice as many people speaking, but if any of them as individuals want to show up, there's nothing preventing that and submitting their comments in writing.
Absolutely, and we've got at least one, maybe more, that are on both. I know Andy is. I thought there was somebody else. Yes, that's right, Dr. Cantu is. Thank you. Anything else, Andy? Anything else?
No, thank you.
All right. Who's next? Tony?
Yeah, two quick questions. One is, will the contractor be required to have any sort of experience working with municipally owned utilities?
So that is a question that we're going to let you all decide. You can pick somebody that does, or you could pick someone that doesn't. It's going to be your call. We want you to pick this group. We want to get you all the information and help with process, but it's up to you.
Okay. My second question is, will RAC members be precluded from having discussions with potential candidates or contractors? It was mentioned earlier, someone had mentioned that there are several companies that were listed that were recommended by some members of the RAC committee. And I was just wondering, given that some of these names have been advanced by RAC members, should not there be some preclusion that there in order for fairness, that there's not contact being made while this process is going on to discern who gets the contract?
Yeah, that's fine. That's pretty common with a blackout period for any contracting in a municipal deal. So I don't think there's anybody going to be upset, because the first step is we get the RFQs. We don't talk to them. We read what they say. We come in here, we discuss it, we make a decision. The second step is they come in here and present to all of us, or they're on the screen presenting to all of us, and we vote the second time. So I don't see that, unless I hear something from somebody real quick, I don't see that's a bad policy.
Reed, I think it actually is in the RFQ that
Yeah.
they're not allowed. So
Yeah,
yes, that's.
that's pretty common.
Okay, thanks.
Is that it, Tony?
Yes, sir. Mhm.
All right, Jack, you got anything?
No, I have nothing. Reed, thank you.
I noticed Kurt's on there. You got anything, Kurt?
Just real quick, appreciate the process. I think it's good, the RFQ, and a good opportunity for us to have a consultant. One thing I may have missed, and I apologize because I dialed in a little late, was as we get to the end and we have a selection, is there a stage at which the RAC would be kind of giving input as to scope, like near, medium, long term, generation, issues, or is this something that's just sort of a consultant that advises as we go in our discussions? I missed the point at which we kind of guide on deliverables.
Yeah, when I've talked to several people about this, their concern has been if we do something that's very specific, like a request for proposal, and we list all the things out, we might, as this is a dynamic process, we might have questions that come up that aren't in the RFP, so therefore it's more of an RFQ and it'll stay more open and more fluid.
Okay.
I think it's an open book.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks. That's it.
Anything else? Okay. I guess that's everybody. Anybody back around? Al?
I know on most bids, we have to have a background on the people that are going to be doing and I'm looking for, and I may be politically incorrect here, but I'm looking for someone that has a nice, long political history as to what goes on at state and federal government, because all that will affect us. And so that's what I would be looking for. I don't know how to put it in the RFQ unless it's just in the biography of the individual persons that are going to be doing this, or the key staff that's going to be working on our behalf. We would want to find that in their biography. Again, I've seen some real stupid policy happen by somebody that's very politically correct or political contacts. And I'm trying to avoid that and use that to our advantage. Somebody that has the long political connections to get us past the goal line.
Would a resume help, you think?
Well,
that would be in the biography of the key people that are going to be serving us.
My point.
Yeah, that's, they'll also put, again, we're wanting I think most of us want a firm here that's got a broad background and a good database and has done this before. So typically, they'll, in an RFQ, they'll ask for other studies they've done. And from those, you can usually pick out whether they've been through this before and who they've done it for. And that's one of the things that we should be able to see on the RFQ.
Okay, I'm just saying that, biography or that RFQ, how are we going to do that? In construction, they give the biography of.
Yeah.
Or
I'm sure they'll do that, and then they'll also put in the other work they've done.
Unless we request it, they may or may not.
We
Well,
will
no,
ask
you have, that's, I have never seen one you didn't ask for.
Okay, we're taking notes.
Yeah.
And anything else you all want to add to the RFQ?
Okay, so I have not seen the RFQ. I didn't have the time to follow the link, but I'll be looking at that. And this hasn't gone out yet to any of these names. So
No,
there's
sir.
still an opportunity to modify the RFQ.
That's our purpose today, is to lay out the concept for you. If you're good, let's firm up the document and then we'll get.
Right, because according to the timeline I'm seeing here, release, so essentially by June 23rd is when the RFQ will go out. So between now and then. Now, are we also the way I see this is we are functioning as essentially a proposal review committee of some kind. Because we're going to recommend 3 or 2 or the top, whatever comes out of the review process. Do we expect to function as, say, 21 individual reviewers, i.e. we have our own criteria for arriving at our rankings, or are we going to have a RAC-only meeting where we actually discuss this criteria before we proceed with recommending? I mean, obviously, at some point, we want to do this independent of CPS Energy because we are functioning as an independent review committee. That's how I see it. And this is my initial reaction, so it may not be well thought out, but that's how I'm reacting to what I'm seeing right now, because as I said, most of this is coming to me for the first time.
Well, we had to bring it sometime.
Yeah.
We had to start. This is a start. Now, again, we can be pretty open on this and very flexible. I mean, there are places where you go through and each person ranks different qualifications, and you've been through those. And my feeling on those is it gets so into the weeds, people never get to the end and say, this is what it is. I want this one, okay? Or I think this one is better than this one, and those 2 are better than the others. So you're going to have to, in some way, come to a conclusion. And I think different people do it different ways. I've also gotten a lot of pushback when individuals are told you have to rank this factor, and this factor, because they say it doesn't make any difference to me. I guess, Doctor, you have something to say, Dr. Romero?
I
Sure.
do. I'm barging into your meeting.
No, you're here. You're supposed. And by the way, we're really glad to have you here because it's important that you're here.
Just from the board perspective, I noticed the timeline ends on August 30th and with awarding the contract, and then there was some discussion about, and it seems reasonable that they're going to need some time to get used to this. So I just want to point out that I think the board is expecting a recommendation in December. So maybe, that's something to be discussed at this next meeting, the future timeline. I know y'all don't want to be rushed, but just to look ahead from that, I just wanted to clarify that that's what we were looking towards was December. So just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Romero. That's absolutely, we got that message. I don't think taking our time here to make a selection is going to impede this group helping us, because it's going to take CPS some time to get all of their work done. And if this group comes on in early September, I think they can certainly make a report to us in September, October, and November. So we've got 3 shots here. Plus, if there's outside questions, we'll set up some way that they can get those answered. It's going to be tight, but I'd rather take the time on the front end with allowing each one of the members to weigh in on. And as far as having a discussion among ourselves, that's going to be a big part of the next meeting. Now, I won't be here, and Dr. Cantu will be running it, but there'll be a large part of the meeting will be just people talking about why they think one or the other or something has better fit for this project. So you will get a chance to talk. I've been through these things where you rank each vendor by different criteria, and quite often in something like this, you've not picked up all the right criteria, and people have a lot of different ideas, so we want to get everything. Is there anything else? Anybody else? Anything else? Okay, I don't see or hear anything online. Let's turn it over to John Kossip now on. Oh, I'm sorry. We did have something. Nobody, I'm sorry.
The RFQ.
Okay, I think I'm hearing you say that the link we're giving you doesn't take you where we want it to take you.
It's not there yet because we haven't issued it yet because we're waiting for feedback. So it will be out there soon. But yes, we have to get it right before we can put it out on the web. So yes.
Never mind.
That's okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right, John, go ahead.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go through modeling assumptions and scenarios. It's really a bit of a continuation from what you saw last meeting in May. We're going to introduce some inputs, some of the key inputs, and just kind of increment and add these key inputs so you get a feel for what we're going to be analyzing in more detail as we get into the the portfolios, the scenarios, et cetera. We also have some answers to some of the questions that we had from the committee last meeting, so we weave some of those in here as we'll go. So we'll talk a bit about service territory, the electric load forecast, some of the ins and outs of that, some of the basics, a little bit about generation performance, and then get into portfolio options with some things we kind of covered last time, but we'd like to reinforce and get some additional feedback. So this is a slide that was shown back last May. Just want to highlight the assumptions part. We introduced assumptions. We're not going to cover the modeling and points of consideration so much here, unless you'd like to ask some questions about that. But that's there's the key assumptions kind of listed here of usage, our STEP program or energy efficiency, existing generation cost and performance, as well as new resources that we may forecast to install. Also, the retirement schedule is important, fuel prices, market prices, and ultimately our financial assumptions are very key to the whole analysis. So service territory, not sure if y'all have seen this before, but there was a request last meeting, but here's a map of our service territory. This territory was specified by the Public Utility Commission a little over 20 years ago when the competitive market was brought into the state and approved, and CPS Energy has this certificated area, and it's shown in that dark brown outline. So that's our total service territory for electric retail service. You see the green, if you can read that, it's the city boundaries, city of San Antonio boundaries. And then we have the surrounding counties that are listed there on the slide. And we do provide service primarily within Bexar County is what we like to say. It's a little easier to talk about, but we do have some overlapping areas that are, extend out into some of these neighboring counties. So now electric load forecast. All right, why do we do it? What's the purpose? Really two main things. The sales, we want to forecast our electric sales. It's one of our important sources of revenue for revenue planning, and that's the megawatt hours. But primarily what I'm going to talk about here is the peak demand forecast, or the megawatts, and the importance of that for long-range capacity planning. I do show the electric sales there in a chart, that stacked bar off to the side, and to give you a sense of magnitude, what are the main components of sales in megawatt hours, and that's the commercial and other, and residential. Those two are roughly about 83%, I think it shows there. And there's a smaller portion that's wholesale megawatt hours. So that's our total electric sales shown there. We have back to these bullets here, it's a 25-year hourly forecast. We use a regression model. We have it's really an industry-leading model. There's many utilities that use it. We've used it for many years. And we have the vendor for that model that's an expert that provides us some technical and analytic support, so like an extension of our staff as we produce forecasts annually. We update this at least annually. And just want to kind of wrap up by saying, we install this generation capacity to meet our community's needs. And any excess generation, we have that opportunity to sell wholesale. It's not a huge slice of our total sales, but it does provide the opportunity to gain some margin. And for every dollar that we make from wholesale, that reduces that would reduce the amount that we'd need from our retail customers, that same dollar amount. So peak demand, a little more about that. We did have a question last May about, how is our forecast versus actuals, and we're showing some of that here, showing the trends. So we show like 10 years of history on that left-hand side and 10 years of forecast on the right-hand side. And the orange line is the actual with, our STEP program included. It's part of the, the overall, actual consumption or reduction of consumption. So we like to track the adjusted actual without STEP. That's that dashed line above to, give you a depiction of what it likely would have looked like without those investments in our STEP program. And we started in 2009 and built on that program, and it grew into a very important resource in our diversified portfolio. As you see, that kind of white space above the dashed line is like about a 400 to 500 megawatt peak hour resource for us. That's a different number than the 771 number that you may be familiar with. That's a non-coincident peak where we count the capacity at all hours that we're able to reduce. So this is strictly that peak hour that we're looking at here. We show the 2009 forecast, again with STEP, just to make sure it's clear that we're comparing the gray line to the orange line. And it shows we track pretty well, at least with that forecast over those years. Now, we won't be using a 13-year forecast. We update it at least annually. So our current forecast is shown on the right-hand side, and that blue dashed line with STEP, and it gives you an indication of what we're projecting for peak demand over the next few years. And it's about 95 megawatts per year of customer growth that we have in the forecast. About a 1.5%, a little over 1.5% compound annual growth rate over the 25-year forecast period for peak, and also for sales is in that range. So a little more on peak demand, a little more breakout of the main things to think about, the key components that make up our peak demand. We have a lot of granularity, very, very detailed regression model by customer class and things like that. It's very detailed, but we've got it rolled up here to where you can see, again, the residential, the commercial, industrial, et cetera, make up the vast majority of that peak demand at the peak hour. And this is a summer peak hour view that we're looking at. And we're looking at the 2025 snapshot here. We included electric vehicles. We had a question last month about electric vehicles and how that fits and what that looks like. And we've got a slide later. We'll talk a little more about electric vehicles. We'll touch on that. We show our STEP program, and we show solar. Actually, that solar is rooftop solar from that customers own. And you would add those two together to get the total STEP achievement. So that's in that 400 megawatt range. Giving you the blue bars are an increase, the orange bars are a decrease, and that steps you down to a forecast for 2025 of the 5,487 megawatts at peak. So this forecast, we're showing just a snapshot of it, but it captures the seasonal and time of day patterns. It's an hourly forecast for 25 years that we feed our revenue models, our production cost models, where we simulate how our generation units will be utilized for energy to support our customer needs. We also capture those summer and winter peaks, not just average, which we plan to average, but there's also extreme peaks that we look at to ensure there's coverage there from a long-term planning perspective. Now, there is uncertainty in this, right? You can say, look, it's just a forecast, right? Yeah, and that's known throughout the industry, and it's common. It's a very common thing. So to cover that uncertainty is with that reserve margin, and we talked about reserve margin a bit last month, and we'll introduce it, some more concepts related to that here, so you can get a feel for how that risk is managed. Weather, we had some questions about weather last month, so we show a summary here. We show in the table we have a typical weather, and that's the average that we plan to. And we show an extreme weather column. So in the typical weather average column, we use a 15 years of history to inform the regression model. And as we complete a new year, the old 15-year-old year rolls off. So we continue to roll that average forward for 15 years and use that data. Just want to highlight the peak winter and the peak summer months that we plan to, and that's the February month. You see the temperature there, the average temperature you would expect for February, and of course there's variability with that, as well as August. That's the big month for summer peak planning, so 102 degrees there. The extreme weather, we go back 30 years to get a better sense of what sort of range we may see. And again, you see in February, you see a much lower temperature that we take a look at what the peak needs would be, as well as the August, again, is our peak month that we plan to. So we track those extreme weather trends also and ensure we have that planned reserve margin can cover our needs. And this slide was showed last meeting in May. So just want to kind of see how, you can kind of connect the dots here and see how this load forecast ties into, peak capacity planning and long-range investment planning. So here again, we're showing 2025, the summer forecast. That band is the demand, the customer demand. The bottom of the band is the forecast we were talking about. And then the top of the band is the reserve margin, the planning reserve margin, the 13.75% factor that we use. And this is a 24-hour profile of, that peak summer day, a typical peak summer day that we would expect. You can see the orange average peak dot, and you see a diamond for stress peak. So we took a look at those. You see in the right-hand box the demand average peak, what we're forecasting for the average summer peak, and also the stress peak. And it tells us that the resources we have would be fully utilized to meet that, but we have sufficient capacity to cover the range of expectations there from a long-term perspective. We also show the supply. We'll get a little bit more into supply and how you got to have a sense of and forecast and estimate how the resources are going to perform. And traditional resources like nuclear, coal, gas storage are assumed to perform at 100% of their summer capability. Coastal wind at 57%, west wind at 20%, and solar at 50%. Again, there's going to be ranges of uncertainty. That's where a reserve margin kind of and additional capacity helps you kind of manage through the uncertainty of what will actually happen on that peak day. Winter day. We showed this again in last May, but to tie it into the load forecast, you see the band of demand with the reserve margin. Little different picture here. You have the two peaks in the winter. That's pretty typical in the morning and then in the evening. As customers' usage patterns change and you consume more in those hours. So the 8 a.m. hours is arguably pretty similar to the 8 p.m., but we do statistically plan for that 8 a.m. peak. We see the average peak not quite as challenging as the summer peak from an average standpoint, but that winter extreme peak, it shows is beyond the reserve margin planning calculation. So the idea is you want to make sure you're keeping an eye on that, having sufficient resources available. So all resources would be utilized to meet that extreme winter peak, while average winter peak is much less challenging. And we have a similar statistic in the box on the right-hand side under supply that shows that, the expectation for output and what can be expected from our resources, with coastal and west wind having similar type of output that we expect on the average, and solar being a very small percentage, because obviously the sun is just coming up at 8 a.m. in the winter months, so we wouldn't expect as much production from solar at that point, but you would expect more as the sun comes up towards midday. You'd have that typical output from solar during the winter months. So a little bit about electric vehicles. We showed it on there. It was a very small sliver. It was 18 megawatts in 2025 expected at our peak. It's maybe 0.3% of our peak demands, but that we're watching that closely. That's expected to grow. In 2030, it's about 0.8%. A pretty significant increase, and so we're monitoring it. We've been forecasting electric vehicles in our demand forecast for about 4 years, and again, it was all new back then. It's still pretty new, and we're making sure we're gathering up credible information from credible sources. So in our a couple of forecasts we're showing here, inputs, we're showing the light duty electric vehicle growth rate, and you have to have reasonable assumptions about when will people charge those vehicles. What would that charging profile look like on an hourly basis? Are they going to charge on peak? Would preferably want to incentivize people not to charge on peak. And we have some pilot programs in the works. Don't want to cover that here, but we could have someone come talk about that if desired. But we do have, we think, reasonable information that gives us a sense of what the time of use would look like, based on some pilot programs, some tests, some things that are happening in the industry that we're aware of. And of course, with the Electric Power Research Institute and that footnote, they're a research arm for the electric utility industry. It's a collaborative group where we can pool our R&D dollars and leverage them with other utilities that are trying to solve common problems. And this certainly is one that's worthy of tackling with that group, and they've been very instrumental in gathering registration data from the state of Texas for vehicles, cleansing that data, making sure it's accurate, and then making sure we have credible information to understand or at least have a reasonable forecast on what we think is the adoption rate would be with electric vehicles. Thus far, we've had some pretty positive feedback that where we think there's going to be we have a good opportunity to have customers set their vehicles or chargers to stay away from on-peak. So that looks like it looks pretty promising to make headway there, so we don't have an issue where everyone's charging at a peak hour. Mid and heavy electric vehicle growth, still staying in touch with our customers, especially the ones that have made it known they're looking at commercial adoption of electric vehicles for some larger fleets, larger trucks, buses, things like that. So we're staying in touch, watching that, and adjusting our forecast as we get new information. Generation performance, we'll talk a little bit more how this ties into, we'll show you some solar and wind profiles. The percentages we showed were at the peak hour, but we showed this in May, and we're kind of building on this utilization chart as we've got base load, we got an array of resources from base load, intermediate, peaking, and renewable that we talked about. Again, the blue is annual energy, how much the various resources have produced on an annual basis. Also, the ancillary services capacity, just as a refresher, that's the capacity that the grid calls on if needed, if there's a reliability or some problem, some unit trips, maybe additional capacity. It's there ready to go to keep the grid in a reliable state. So those together give you kind of your total utilization. Now, I want to focus on the solar and wind at the bottom. You know, it doesn't have, or they don't qualify for the ancillary services capacity. We got into that a little bit with Mr. Key's presentation. So, and you know, it's just nature of the technology today. And you see the utilization rates for energy that are, you know, pretty typical shown there. And we'll look a little bit more about those. We'll show a little bit more about this summer peak contribution. This is today. This is calendar year 2022. The capacities that we have today. On that solar and wind profile, we're showing a kind of a notional solar PV profile there. Either, you know, winter, summer. It's kind of an average day of the year, and you know, primarily you get the maximum output around, you know, noon or so. And then the solar obviously is going to drop off in the non-daylight hours. Now, West Texas wind, you notice that dip. That's very common. It's very well understood, and the overall grid process compensates for that. You have a midnight peaking resource on the average for West Texas wind. Again, this is, you know, averages for a typical day, and you're going to have variability as you get in smaller and smaller time increments. And then coastal wind has a much different profile and really follows peak summer load more closely as it peaks there in the afternoon. You see that kind of average peak in the 4, 5, 6 p.m. time frame. So moving to the tables in the middle, you know, we incorporate these operating profiles in our peak planning. And, you know, that's kind of a repeat up there at the top, the percentages that we showed earlier for the summer peak. And then down below, we did the math where we took our total renewable fleet, applied those percentages, and just to kind of drive home the fact that there's this nameplate or total capability or total capacity number, and then there's the total summer number that we would roll into our planning estimates. So the total in our portfolio today is about 1,519 megawatts, and then as you apply the factors above the table, we would count on 635 megawatts or so at peak. And then when we get into, you know, this is a long range view that we're dealing with here in with this committee. But be assured that there's you know, the daily and the shorter time durations where, you know, the folks on the real-time desk working 24/7 are monitoring all this and using daily weather forecasts and information that they have available to understand what and predict what's coming in a shorter duration and you know, compensate as needed. So that takes me to portfolio options. I'll turn it over to Mr. Paulo.
Thank you, John. I'll walk through the last few slides here. So good afternoon, everybody. Almost evening. But I wanted to start with this slide. As we look at, again, the capacity planning that we're looking to do this summer and the future of our generation units, we wanted to show kind of a summarized view graphically of some of the challenges in front of us or the decisions that we're looking to make, right? So as you look at this slide, what we're showing is all of our non-solar, non-wind units. And just to kind of orient you to the slide, the blue shading means that that unit is part of our active portfolio. So if you jump down to the third line and look at Spruce 1, for example, and we show that shaded in blue until the start of 2029 or end of 2028. And then we show it just white space. So that white space means basically that, you know, for the purpose of this generation planning work, you know, we're showing that as a unit that's being retired, offline, not part of our portfolio. So that's capacity that we need to replace. The only other color you see up there, you know, is the gray on Spruce 2. That indicates the potential conversion from coal-fired to natural gas-fired. So, roughly in that end of 2027. And one scenario is that we convert it to gas and it continues to run as a gas-fired unit. So when you look at, and again, just kind of the footnote, I do want to draw your attention there. These are all dates that have not been approved by the board, but this is part of what we will be working through here as we go through the summers, looking through these scenarios. Those retirement dates and what that capacity gets replaced with will be the basis of the recommendation that we'll make to the board. But when you look at that collection of white space, if you will, on that slide, it's about 3,000 megawatts of generation that we're going to, new generation, that we'll be adding by 2030 to continue to meet our customer needs. So that's the retirement of those units. Some of that 3,000 megawatts will get filled in by Flex Power Bundle. We'll cover that on the next slide. That will replace the 3 Bronick units. But when you look at that generation and back to what John showed earlier, talking about expected load growth, we do have to account for that. Similar view here, but just in bullets, right? So if you look at the retirements, same thing I showed on the last slide. If you look at the planned additions, what I'm showing there in the solar, storage, firming, that's the Flex Power Bundle, 900 megawatts of solar, 50 megawatts of storage, and 500 megawatts of the firming capacity. The next 4 lines that are highlighted in gray, that's the capacity that we need to replace, right? That ties back to that 3,000 megawatts of new generation that I talked about. When you look at the load growth capacity, again, John mentioned about 95 megawatts of new peak load growth every year. If you kind of run that out to the end of the decade, it's a little over 700 megawatts, 730 megawatts roughly in that ballpark. So somewhere between basically a Rio Nogales, Spruce 2 size type power plant is the expected load growth that we have here over the community for the next several years. On the other, again, some of the considerations as we go through the planning process, Spruce 2, one scenario is converting it to natural gas. Another scenario would be to retire it completely and replace it with other generation renewables, for example. We also want to look at some newer technologies. Geothermal is one that will likely factor into our modeling and such. We are very excited about the pilot project that we're doing with QuidNet for geomechanical pump storage. Again, another example of an emerging technology that we do think has a place in the portfolio as we go forward. But ultimately, as Benny said, and I'll touch upon it again, but as we work through the different scenarios, we're certainly looking to this group for input on the different scenarios that we look at and make sure that we're looking at a good variety of options, so to speak. This slide just kind of summarizes in a way, I think, what we just shown. If you look at the blue, that's our existing capacity. You see it walk down over the course of the decade. That's the projected or the likely retirements that I just showed on the last 2 slides. The orange capacity that we're adding, that's the Flex Power Bundle, solar, storage, firming. So that's the known additions, if you will, to our portfolio over the next few years. If you look at the 2 horizontal lines, the bottom line is our load obligations. The top line would be load plus our reserve margin. But again, you see that growing over the course of the decade. So the combination of all of that, load growth, the retirements that we're talking about, presents a gap. That gap is what we're here to solve through the generation planning process. Obviously our intent is not to operate at the end of the decade with a gap. You interpret that gap as being exposed to the market. Where we're having to buy power from the market. That is a strategy. I think it's a better strategy for us to be in control of our own destiny. And that's, the decisions that we'll make over this generation planning process or the recommendations. I apologize, Dr. Romero, the decision is the board's. Our job is to provide the recommendation. I wanted to show this view. I think at the last meeting, we walked through kind of the history of our diversification. So we showed several of these little pie charts that showed how our generation, the fuel mix has evolved over the last 50 years or so, starting in 1970 as an entirely 100% natural gas-fired fleet, to where we are today in that box labeled as 2021. A couple things I'll point out if you look at the lines below that. Nameplate capacities, as it says, that's what our generation units whether it's coal, nuclear, wind, solar, what it's capable of producing at maximum or full load. The capacity at peak ties into what we plan for from a long-range planning perspective. So you see those two numbers are different, as John showed on the earlier slide. Because of the way wind and solar perform throughout the day, they don't produce 100% of their nameplate capacity across the peak hour of the day when we need it. Particularly with solar, just by the way the sun ramps down. Wind, a little more variable. Some days it'll produce exactly what we expect from the percentages that John showed. Some days we may get more wind than that across the peak hour. That ties into how we plan, as John said, from a day ahead in a real time or today basis. But from a long range generation planning process, we apply those percentages. The 2025 pie basically shows what our fleet will look like after we retire the 3 Browning units and then add the flex power bundle capacity. So you see an increase in renewables, that's the 900 megawatts of solar. You do see a decrease in gas, that'd be the retirement of the Browning units. 2030, shows, I guess a couple things I'd point out. The 2 wedges that are kind of detached from the pie is part of what we're solving for here as we go through this process. So we have Spruce 2 labeled, that's your gray wedge. And then the pink wedge, or pinkish, it's labeled as needed. That ties into the capacity that we will need to identify to replace Summers 1, Summers 2, Spruce 1. I think when you look at that, if you look at kind of the progression, you do see from 2025 to 2030, a decrease in renewables, a decrease in gas. But the reality is, as we make decisions around Spruce 2, as we make decisions around that category labeled as needed, they're going to move those pink and gray will go away, and they'll either move into the green box for gas or the purple box for renewables or some combination of the two. And I wanted to end, we showed this slide last time, but again, these are the scenarios, if you will, that we're looking at starting with. We're starting with, the note at the bottom says, one of the assumptions is we're converting Spruce 2 to gas. I said that's one scenario. We'll also look at a different way of handling retiring Spruce 2 completely. But in terms of the other capacity, so Spruce 1, Summers 1, Summers 2, we're looking at 3 basic approaches, right? One is you replace all of that capacity with renewable, a combination of wind, solar, storage type assets. Geothermal could play into that as well. We'll look at replacing that capacity with all natural gas, combination of as we say here, combined cycle units. Those are like we have with AVR and Nogales, units that are capable of running base load if we need them to, but they also ramp and cycle very effectively. And we'll look at combining that with reciprocating internal combustion engine. So basically, those are more peaker type units that'll run, fewer hours of the day, or intended to run fewer hours of the day. Doesn't mean they can't run much longer, but their intended usage would be more like our Milton B. Lee units, for example. And then the third scenario or third option will be to take a blended approach, and you have replace that needed capacity with a combination of renewables plus natural gas assets. As Benny said earlier, we are looking for feedback, insight, and thoughts from this group as far as additional scenarios and additional items that you would like to see included in the different options that we run and that we model. I know we've gotten some of that feedback from different meetings. We've got that, I think we showed some of that feedback last time. So as we get in deeper into the process and flesh out, if you will, or the details of each of these scenarios, I think we'll be able to come back and show you how we've incorporated the feedback that we've gotten already. But to the extent that folks have some other thoughts and ideas, again, please communicate with Reed and communicate directly with us so that we can factor that into the planning process as we work through the summer. So thank you very much.
Okay, unfortunately, I wish we had more time, but we'll start back around, and looks like we'll have time to go around once. I don't know, so don't leave. Let me just get through the people. Michael?
Okay. John and Kevin, once again, thanks. Great presentations. Great presentations. looking at the, slide 20, we go back to slide 20. I understand our scope of, our time frame we're looking at is till about 2030. But as far as the geothermal and the geomechanical pump storage, are we ahead right now of our aspirations of bringing that technology to using before 2030? And or when will beta testing on this technology be complete? Will we have a chance to put that in by 2030? I know we've been talking about gas and solar, but is none of this geothermal stuff, are we going to be able to incorporate any of that by 2030?
So a couple things. Like with the geomechanical pump storage, we have a pilot project in place. There's a construction timeline that's the next steps, right? Is our partners identifying their final site selection and work on construction. So that, I think before that facility comes online and is operational, is probably a couple years away. So I do think, again, assuming the pilot is successful, we'll have a chance to scale that up. I do think by middle or more towards the end of the decade. Benny, did you want to comment more on the geothermal?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. In turn, I'm trying to get over here and get on the camera. In terms of new technology, the development time is out there a pretty good ways. Okay, and I didn't get an answer. The short answer is no. Geothermal is a great opportunity, we believe, based upon what we know today. But by 2030, we might be in a position of bringing a plant online. So we're going to have to do something more traditional between now and 2030 to fill in those gaps Kevin showed us.
Dana? Dee Dee?
Thank you. I appreciate looking at both the winter and summertime forecasts in terms of supply, looking at wind and solar here locally and looking at it statewide. I think there's thinking among the committee that wind and solar are just not available, they're not reliable, maybe they're not affordable. And I think that this is showing something different. I should have probably asked this earlier when we were getting the legislative update from ERCOT, but I'm wondering if it would help us to understand and make some decisions what's happening at ERCOT in terms of where wind and solar are at. I track ERCOT fairly regularly, and looking at these last week where we had triple-digit temperatures, wind saved us. It really did help in terms of the grid. So, but I know that obviously there are limitations because we can't get wind to where we need it all the time because of transmission. We don't have the transmission capacity. And the variability of wind, we need the battery storage. So I'm wondering, how are y'all going to figure that in, into our planning? I don't know what it looks like in terms of building more transmission lines across the state to get us more wind and solar. So just wondering what y'all's input on that. And based on our input, what we want to see in the generation planning, how many scenarios do y'all figure you're going to run in our modeling?
So let me work backwards since the last one. When you say scenarios, you're talking about different, not the options I'm talking about.
Right, the scenarios that
You presented 3.
Right.
I think we're looking ideally, 5 to 7 or so, I think would make sense. Looking at, knowing what we have to do between now and the end of the decade. So that's kind of where my thought is right now, and If we have fewer, we have fewer. If we have more, we'll obviously try to incorporate as many as we can within the timeframe. Working backwards, I do think when you look at how to incorporate continued growth of renewables, whether it's statewide or whether it's within our portfolio, storage is, I think, has to be part of that. And that's why we are looking at storage, I think, will be factored into the different scenarios that we run. And then your first point, I think it's a great piece of information. We'll be happy to bring that back at one of the next meetings. We'll have to work with Reed and Dr. Cantu on agendas and such. But I do think it is a very helpful view to talk about the kind of where the ERCOT market has, how it's evolved over the last few years in terms of the wind, solar, battery growth and expected growth, and some of the transitions, if you will, between how much energy came from wind, coal, nuclear, gas, and how that's trended over the last 10 years or so. I think it's a very interesting piece of data to show everybody.
So DD on scenarios, we identified the 3, and like Kevin said, maybe 7, maybe 8, I don't know. We're going to run whatever it takes. At the end of the day, it's whatever you all come up with is what we want to run. Okay. And this isn't something that we have to stop doing. I mean, when you think about the due diligence process we use within our business, we'll continue to model scenarios going forward as technology changes. For example, QuidNet, we're doing the test now, and I was able to find out it typically is about an 18-month learn cycle. And then there's a real opportunity there to expand that technology, we believe, based on what we're seeing. But the pilot's running about 18 months. So modeling is a way of life for us. And, I mentioned to you that Charles River Associates, CRA, has been with us a long time. It's because of that. Modeling is a way of life for us, and it's something we'll continue. And as new technology comes into the market, we're going to test it. We're going to see what we can do with it. But we'll run as many scenarios as you all can come up with and think might make sense. Let's get them on the table, and let's get them to you to look at. Does that help?
Yep, thanks.
Thank you.
Is that all, Didi?
Yes, thanks.
Michael?
Yeah, can we pull slide number 12 up? The summer demand. Sure, it's something we talk more about later, but obviously, at least to me, obviously the issue is around that 7 to 9 o'clock in the evening time frame where we're really pinched, and it seems to me like the reason that our capacity is dropping off is because that's where solar's dropping off. So does there become a point where until we have reliable, affordable battery storage, is there a point where we think we could have too much solar? In other words, we have all this capacity during the day, but we don't need it, but it's that little shoulder over there that we're really concerned about. And if there's no solar there, is there a point that we've just overinvested in solar?
I'll take a stab at that one. As far as overinvested or too much solar, I think the way that we would analyze this, we're going to have, we show economically optimal, or we want to optimize the renewables and the firming capacity. You have to have the firming capacity to maintain reliability and to maintain, to meet our customers' demand. So we'll take a look at that and see where that kind of that optimization process, along with Charles River Associates, kind of use some of their ideas and take a look and see where we end up, what we think, and you'll see the results there. But you are correct. That is your solar resources dropping off, and that's a known issue. So we'll continue to watch that closely and forecast it.
That's all I have today.
Wayne? Peter?
Thank you, Reed. Thank you, Kevin and John, for the presentation. So today, City Council approved the new energy efficiency program, and it's noted at the presentation to City Council. The new energy efficiency program is a key component to our generation planning strategy. And with that said, I want to thank you for providing the historical and forecast peak megawatt data with and without STEP. If you can go to that slide, thank you, slide 9. And so you made the point of the value and what you project and the history based on the data. And so going forward, studying and maximizing the program to impact generation planning decisions made through the modeling process is important, obviously. And what I'd like to propose, there's a scripture that says, many are the plans of a man, but the purposes of the Lord shall prevail. Many times you have a goal and it doesn't quite happen right away, but you keep on pressing. And there was a great push for a study on that EE program. And I'm still for that study, and I think that study needs to happen. And I think it should, and this is my proposal, Reed, in respect to the work we're going to be doing in generation planning, is a subgroup, a collaborative amongst the RAC that's working on how we can maximize that demand management component that comes from that EE generation planning, so that we can show the value of how they're working together, meet that need of addressing the priorities that we said that we thought that the EE, that program should have. And now that it's factored into our generation planning model, how do we maximize it? And I know there's been talk on the council about a targeted weatherization program with demand management, and I had asked about that. And I know it's more detailed, but the value of when you push that button, how you have that value and how we can continue to increase that. If we don't deal with it now, if we say, well, it's been approved, we're going to leave it behind, we'll deal with it in a year, I think it's incumbent upon us as the RAC to be working on that process right now as we're doing the generation planning. And so it really knocks out two birds with one stone. It firms up those goals that City Council has, and it also allows us to factor in a greater benefit to the generation planning model. But those are my thoughts. More of a proposal, Reed, for us to consider as a RAC, and you don't have to answer today, but those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, good.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Peter.
thanks for your input. Just make sure it's clear that our STEP program is continuing. So we'll continue that program. There's no drop off. I mean, we expect that to still be in our forecast, and we'll continue to forecast it and have very similar programs that we have today. I guess there's going to be some evolution of that, and that's a process that are we planning? Reed, what was the plan for a EE study, or what was the thought?
We have to talk about it, but since we weren't given exact plans, and as you can see, we kind of don't know what they're going to do, and a lot of things like community solar has been brought up, the EV program's been brought up, the winterization. We'll try to figure out a way to keep in front of us as CPS develops these programs. All I can say is we could have them bring them back to us so that we see what's doing. I know that's also something that the Municipal Utility Council was wanting to do, so it shouldn't be double work for them, Peter.
So what are your thoughts on the working group, collaborative subcommittee, or in some form applying work toward that process over the next 6 months as we're going through this process at the same time, versus waiting until something comes back to us and then we're rushing at the last minute to
I'm not
figure it
sure.
out?
I need to listen to your concept there a little more. I'm not sure I can just grab it right now and answer. Okay?
Thank you.
Is that fair?
That's fair. I just
Okay.
wanted to put it out there.
No.
That's
We'll talk
that's
about
the
it. I'm
proposal.
trying to
So just
understand
wanna
how we.
flesh it out best I can with the time I have, and I don't want to take any more
Yeah.
time.
No, that's fine. But I mean, I need to listen to what you're saying with more detail. Anne Marie.
So we have solar rooftop, we have solar farm, and we have solar, I'm not sure what the name of the program is, community solar, right? Which is different from the farm. Community solar is, I buy panels on the parking garage, right? Just so we're all on the same page. Why are you only talking about rooftop solar in these figures?
Okay, good question. The rooftop solar that we showed there, that's the customer owned, so it's behind their meter. So the way we count it or deal with it is include it in the load forecast. So it shows, we plan, in our planning models, we show it as a reduction in load since it's behind the meter. The other ones you're talking about, community, the utility scale, the large scale, those are all on utility side of the meter, larger scale. So those are handled on the supply side. So one we count on the demand side, one we count on the supply side.
Counting the one on the supply side.
For the rooftop,
For the farm and the community solar, just like you have, I'm sorry if this is a.
no, that's
not
okay.
a-
It's,
You know, not a good question.
but community solar is also, we also count that on the supply side. It's a larger scale unit and
Yes, but where is it in the list? You've listed, does it have a code that I don't know? Maybe that's it. Maybe it's got an acronym on this list and I'm just not familiar with it.
yeah, we haven't shown you a breakout of all of our solar plants and all the contracts that we have. We
doesn't-
show it aggregated. We just, when we say solar PV on the supply side, it's an aggregated number.
So I guess I missed that you had solar PV. on the
Anne
supply
Marie,
side.
let me take a track at this.
Okay.
Okay, so I've not really agreed with the way they do it, but I had to understand it to disagree with it. So what they do is they actually say, take your house. Your house is going to use, let's say, 1,000 kilowatts or 1,200 kilowatts a month. And so they'll project that because you're a household, they'll give a number on that. So they give the projection, and then they look at how much rooftop solar you've got, and they reduce that off of that number. So the first number was that dotted line. The second number is the net requirement. So that's the way. Now, under that solid line, they've got all of the community solar, they've got the industrial solar, that's the power purchase agreements. They've got all of those building up to that solid line. But in your case, they'll say, we've got 20,000 households, the households use an average, and then we've got X amount of rooftop, and they drop that off the rooftop. I think that's the way it works. And if that didn't explain it, we'll go through it after the meeting. Okay? All right, go ahead. Next is Christopher, I guess. Is it somebody else? I can't see who's there. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for the detailed presentation. Let me start with a comment. I am hoping that our friends over at DeLorean are going to be going with the fusion option, because right now, during summer stress peak, we can not quite power 6 flux capacitors. So I've got my fingers crossed there. But moving onward, there are some solar projects further west in Nevada and Arizona, Solana and Crescent Dunes, that use a solar energy capacity, but instead of photovoltaic, they're using the molten salt approach so that you can store the energy during the day and then use it at night. Is that a technology that could potentially be used in West Texas?
You're asking about the solar thermal technology. What's very prevalent now, and with the cost reductions, solar photovoltaics or solar PV, the panels have been, those have really taken off and prices come down, et cetera. Before solar PV came down in price, it was much more expensive than these solar thermal plants. And 15 years ago, 18 years ago, that was being pursued by developers to, as an alternative, still viable plants. You have working plants out there, and what they do is use mirrors to collect the heat, concentrate it with a collection source, and then use that heat to create steam that turns a steam turbine. So that's another technology. It gathers low density energy over a large area. It works, they've proven it. It's got some risk because there's still some maturity issues and cost issues. And there's a lot of steel for the mirrors and all that stuff. So it became less competitive once solar voltaic prices dropped. The solar thermal became less competitive, but there's still work being done. There's still research, things like that. I mean, who knows? There could be another solar thermal technology that emerges that becomes cost effective.
Thank you. And I appreciate the weather data on page 11, slide 11. Do Do you know offhand whether this is an average of different weather stations, or is it just the international airport?
I'd have to get you that information. I don't know, Laura, do you want to go ahead and answer that one for us?
I think it would be helpful if we could see what that running average might have been going back, say, 60 years, just to help track changes in temperature locally. And that may be better done with a single location to help reflect changes in our average temperatures in our climate here. And at what point would that kind of a spike start to affect our estimates on future demand in terms of existing homes requiring more energy, like in the summertime for greater heat? If for instance, the average temperature in August goes up to 111. I'm sorry, wrong cat. That would be hot. If the average temperature goes up to 103 or 104.
Yeah, we have models that that show the response, and we forecast it'll inform us on peak demand. What that peak demand will look like, how it'll adjust, and we would adjust our planning accordingly if that average is moving up, and our peak capacity planning would move up accordingly.
John, is this a variable that you could do sensitivity analysis on in your models? So you could run the temperature, average temperature up or down to see how it works? As a sensitivity, you take a case and then run a sensitivity on? Yeah, we can probably do something like that. Anything else?
That does it, thanks.
Okay. Femi?
In the interest of time, I'm going to ask a very short question because I have many more. Slides 8, keyword there, 25 years. Slide 12. 12, right? Again, the hourly scale, slide 13. The hourly scale, and then 17. So again, hour of the day. I'm really very concerned that you're trying to model 25 years on an hourly time scale. I think I've said this a few times before. Pick a date 10 years down the line, June 12, 2028. Can you tell me you know the profile for that day?
We have a profile, yeah. And then, the first 5 years are more near term. Those are the ones where you can develop plans around the first 5 and maybe stretch into 10 years. Now, we don't know what it's going to be. The 25-year kind of informs, kind of keeps us in touch with a longer range look, but you're right,
Yeah, that's my big concern because we're talking about running 7 models. Didi is asking how many can you run? The more you run this long range on a very short time scale, the more computing resources you're going to need to devote and the fewer simulations you can run. Just purely at the very surface in terms of how much computing power do you need. You might have it, I'm not aware of it, but I'm concerned that you probably don't need to do that level of discretization for something that's at a strategic level of 25 years. Those are my comments, but we can talk about this some more later.
Yeah, that's good. That's good feedback. We do run hourly models, and the industry, it's pretty common in industry. They're able to manage the computing time with that. So we think we can manage that.
Okay, one just to follow on Femi's question, if you can just log this one back with his. Again, we're getting to whether this is an optimizing model or whether it's a satisficing model. If it is an optimizing model, what's your objective function? So that'll make a whole bunch of difference on how long it takes to solve it. If you've got some kind of big LP and you run a lot of them, it's going to be a lot of compute power.
Yeah.
Simulation might not be.
And just want to add on to that, we've got Charles River Associates coming in next month to talk more in depth about modeling, techniques, uncertainties, things like that.
Good. Anything else, Femi? Al?
Long question, hopefully have a short answer. How soon do we need to have new generation online? And how long does it take to build that new generator?
Say what you want. By building things, you want.
All right, well, you showed the projection. We're focusing on the next 10 years. So 2025 is a key time frame. You know, with the Browning units rolling offline, the gas steam units, 860 megawatts. We've got that covered with the Flex Power bundle. The next time we need something is in that 2027 and then 2029 timeframe, 2030, where we're talking about the Summers gas steam units, potentially the Spruce units also are in question there. So this next 10-year time frame is the time frame that we're looking at. So as far as building resources, we can get into that too. It depends on the resource.
So how soon do we need to have something online? And how long does it take to build that, whatever it is?
Okay, so typically 3 to 5 years, depending on what we're building. Okay, so 3 to 5 years is the window we've got to be able to meet those needs. The Browning units we're dealing with our Flex Power bundle. And we've gone through that, and when complete, we'll have a program in place. What we're seeking your help with now is moving forward. We've got to address the Summers units, and we've got to address the Spruce units. And then we've got to address load growth. So those are the areas, and there's another sheet that shows it. But depending on what the board decides we will do, it will tell us how long it'll take. But 3 to 5 years is good rule of thumb.
If it takes 5 years to build, so we got to start building by 2025, worst case.
Yeah, actually earlier than that, because we need some power starting in 26, 27. You know, we may be able to push a plan a year or so on those retirement dates.
So we should have decided this last year. We're behind the ball already. We need to hurry up and make a decision.
We're on the edge, let me say that. We really do. This is why the board has asked for something this year. We have got to give our board something by November-ish this year so that they can pull it all together, make a decision, and we can get started.
I just didn't want to get stuck in that paralysis analysis.
No, nor do we, which is why full court press, whatever we can do to help you all and inform you, we want to get it in your hands. We want to get that information to you because it's time for us to move.
I yield my time.
Let's go through the folks online. John Agatha. Anaqua Garcia. Andy Costello. Well, I see Tony there. Tony?
I don't have any questions, no.
Jack? I don't know if Jack's still there. Okay. Kurt?
Yeah, I'm here, Reed. Just one for now. When we looked at the power generation against peak, I was just wondering what mechanical availability, and it probably varies by generation source, but what mechanical availability, maybe the regression model assumption is, and how we should think about that going forward if we're looking at, you know, renewables or gas or anything else. Well, what is sort of the common assumption on mechanical availability?
John, what do you, in the models?
Thinking about it, trying to how to explain how to separate that out. I would say on the traditional fleets throughout ERCOT, you'd expect about a 7%, I guess, forced outage rate. Is that what you're asking about for traditional power generation?
When you say, okay, I'm not sure what you mean by traditional fleet. You know, you're talking about natural gas or the combination that we have, you know, of generation sources we've used to
We're
this
talking
point.
about natural gas, nuclear plants, coal plants, natural gas plants.
Okay, so you say 7% unavailability, in other words, 93% mechanical availability. I'm not talking about generation, I'm talking about just availability.
Okay,
So
so
at 93. And if it's complicated, I can get it later. I'm just trying to get a rule of thumb to use as we move forward, thinking about generation mix, you know, what you all use in your analysis on
So-
availability. Mhm.
Okay, so when we do our modeling, we've got different availabilities for different technology and for different age of our units. So when you look at our older gas steam units, you know, 70% availability is pretty good when you look at the maintenance required to keep them running reliably, right? So about 70% is a good round number for gas steam. For coal units, our newer coal units, we're in the upper 80s to lower 90s, depending on what the outage the overhaul maintenance looks like for the year. Okay, so nuclear is where you get up into your 99-ish range. Okay, and I think we're seeing solar typically is very high. It's a little harder because just look at the capacity factor. Because when it's there, it's running.
Yeah.
And wind is the same way. So really don't model them quite the same way. We just look at what we tend to get out of them.
No, that's helpful. That's enough of an answer for now. Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for I just have one thing. We don't have to get an answer on it now, but back on slide 19, if you put that up here, when I add all of the gas units that are coming out plus Spruce 1, I don't know, I get 2,249. And I guess my overriding concern continues to be out of that 2,250 megawatts, how much of that are we actually, there's two things, how much can we get and according to the mechanical ability, and how much do we want to get according to the market? Those two things are working on that. And I still believe as we go through this planning, we're going to have to get some efficiencies, both in being able to run the new plants or whatever we do at a higher rate, and also run them at a lower cost so we can use them more. So ultimately, I'd like to get an answer on that. Still haven't got it. Okay. Anything else, anybody?
Can I answer the first question real quick?
You don't need to right now. I'm over the time here with folks. We'll get that later. My questions aren't that important. Okay. Anything else? All right. Thanks. Appreciate it. Sorry we ran over a few minutes here. See y'all next month. Like I say, Dr. Cantu will be running that one. I'd like to thank Dr. Romero again for coming today and staying through the whole thing. Appreciate it. All right.
Thank you.